Before we begin, if you're watching from New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, or anywhere else in the world, drop your city in the comments below. And if you want to see how Eliza's story ends, make sure you stay until the very last word, hit that like button, and let me know what you think. Trust me, you won't see this ending coming. The champagne glass shattered against marble, and for a split second the entire ballroom fell silent. Eliza Whitmore didn't flinch. She stood perfectly still in her emerald gown, one hand resting on the gilded balcony rail, watching the golden liquid spread across the floor like spilled secrets. Below her, 300 of Manhattan's wealthiest citizens turned their heads in unison, their faces a blur of curiosity and barely concealed judgment.
"Clumsy tonight, aren't we, darling?" The voice came from behind her, smooth, practiced, empty. Theodore Ashford, her fiancé, stepped into view with that same charming smile he wore like armor. His hand found the small of her back, fingers pressing just hard enough to remind her who was supposed to be in control. Eliza turned her head slowly, meeting his eyes. "Was I? I hadn't noticed. 3 months ago, she might have apologized. 2 months ago, she would have laughed it off, played the gracious bride-to-be. But tonight, standing in the Vandermeer estate with diamonds cold against her throat and lies thick in the air, Eliza Whitmore was done pretending. "You've been distracted all evening," Theodore murmured, his smile never faltering even as his eyes went hard. "People are starting to talk." "Let them." His fingers tightened. "Eliza." She pulled away, smoothing down the silk of her dress with deliberate care. "If you'll excuse me, I need some air." Theodore's jaw clenched, but he didn't follow. He couldn't, not with Senator Blackwood approaching, ready to discuss the railway merger that would make the Ashford family even wealthier. Theodore had never been good at choosing between power and control. Tonight, power won. Eliza descended the curved staircase with practiced grace, her spine straight, her face serene. Inside, her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird. 6 more days, she thought. 6 more days and I'm supposed to marry him. The thought made her sick. She'd known for months what Theodore really was. The first hint came last spring, when she'd arrived early at his club and found him with his hand up some socialite's skirt in a private dining room. He'd laughed it off, called her paranoid, made her feel small for even mentioning it. Then came the whispers from her friends, the ones brave enough to tell her the truth. Catherine Delacroix, Margaret Thornberry, that opera singer from Boston whose name Eliza could never remember. 3 mistresses that she knew about. Probably more that she didn't. And the gambling, sweet heaven, the gambling. She'd seen the ledgers in his study, the ones he thought he'd hidden well enough. Debts totaling more than $80,000, spread across half the gentlemen's clubs in New York. Her family's railroad shares, the ones that would become his property the moment they married, were already earmarked to cover them. She'd known all of this, and still, she'd smiled and nodded and continued planning a wedding that made her want to scream, because that's what women like her did. They survived, they endured, they made the practical choice, even when it felt like swallowing glass. She pushed through the terrace doors and into the October night. The air hit her skin like cold water, sharp and clarifying. Behind her, the orchestra struck up another waltz, the music floating out through open windows along with the sound of laughter. Artificial, performative, hollow. Eliza moved to the stone balustrade, gripping it hard enough that her knuckles went white. She could feel the weight of the diamond necklace Theodore's mother had insisted she wear tonight. To show everyone you're truly part of the family now, dear. The stones pressed against her collarbone like a collar. Running away already? Eliza spun around. A man stood in the shadows near the garden wall, half hidden by the trailing branches of a willow tree. Even in the darkness, she recognized him instantly. Caleb Hawthorne. Tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes that seemed to see straight through every carefully constructed lie she'd ever told. "I wasn't aware you'd been invited," she said, keeping her voice level. "I wasn't." He stepped forward into the lamplight, and she saw he wasn't wearing formal attire, just a simple dark coat and boots that had actually been used for walking, not polished for show. "But I heard you were going to be here. And you thought you'd, what, crash the Vandermeer ball just to say hello?" Something like that. They hadn't spoken in 2 years. Not since that summer afternoon when he'd asked her to choose a different life, and she'd laughed in his face. She remembered the exact words she'd used.
I'd rather die than live like you." She'd been standing in her father's garden, wearing a white dress and holding a parasol, looking at Caleb like he was something pitiful, something beneath her. He'd been working as her father's land manager then, overseeing the upstate properties. Competent, quiet, devastatingly intelligent in a way that made most of the men in her social circle look like decorative idiots. She'd noticed him immediately. It was hard not to, but she'd also known exactly what noticing him would cost. So when he'd asked her to leave with him, to forget about society and status and build something real, she'd destroyed him with words. Made sure he understood exactly how impossible, how laughable, how utterly beneath her dignity his proposal was. She'd been 22 and stupid, still believing that wealth meant safety, that status meant power. Now she was 24 and exhausted, standing on the edge of a future that would slowly suffocate her. "You should go," she said quietly. "Theodore will have security throw you out if he sees you." Theodore's busy talking money with men who think he's worth something. Caleb's voice was flat, matter-of-fact. "They don't know what you know." Eliza's breath caught. "And what do I know?" "That he's been lying to you since the day you met him. That he's got 3 separate mistresses across the city. That he's gambled away half his father's fortune and plans to use your family's railroad shares to cover his debts." Caleb paused. "That you've known all of this for months and you're still going through with the wedding." She wanted to deny it. She wanted to slap him, to scream, to demand how dare he stand there and judge her choices when he had no idea what her life was like. But she couldn't, because he was right. "Why are you here, Caleb?" He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Because I thought you deserved to know you still have a choice." A choice? The laugh that escaped her throat was bitter, broken. "You think I have a choice? My father's dead. My brother's in Europe spending what's left of our money on God knows what. The Ashford marriage is the only thing standing between my mother and complete ruin. So tell me, Caleb, what choice do I have?" "You could leave." "And go where? Do what?" She shook her head. "You don't understand how this world works." "No," he said quietly. "I understand exactly how it works. That's why I left it." Before she could respond, the terrace doors burst open and a woman's high-pitched laughter spilled out into the night. Eliza recognized the voice immediately. Catherine Delacroix, one of Manhattan's most vicious gossips, and Theodore's current favorite mistress. "Oh, Theodore, you're terrible." Catherine giggled, her words slightly slurred. "What will poor Eliza think?" "Eliza thinks what I tell her to think," Theodore's voice replied, smooth and careless. "She's well-trained." Caleb's entire body went rigid. Eliza forced herself to remain still, her face blank, even as something sharp and violent twisted in her chest. "Well-trained," Catherine repeated, finding this hysterical. "Like a little show dog. How delightful." They were close now, just on the other side of the terrace wall, hidden from view but clearly audible. Eliza could hear the rustle of Catherine's silk dress, the clink of ice in Theodore's glass. She knew she should move, should announce her presence, should do something to stop this humiliation before it got worse. But she couldn't move. She stood frozen, listening to her fiancé discuss her like she was livestock. "Speaking of which," Catherine purred, "what will you do with her after the wedding? Keep her locked up in that drafty estate upstate while you have your fun in the city?" Something like that. Theodore sounded bored now, distracted. "She'll have her charities and her sewing circles. That's all women like her need." "And the money?" "Signed over to me the morning after the wedding. Her idiot brother already agreed to the terms." Eliza's nails dug into her palms hard enough to draw blood. Her brother had agreed to the terms. Of course he had. James would agree to anything that meant he didn't have to take responsibility for the family finances. He'd been perfectly happy to hand over control of everything to Theodore, as long as it meant he could continue his extended tour of European casinos and brothels. "Clever boy," Catherine murmured. "And here I thought you married her for love." "Love?" Theodore laughed, a sound Eliza had once found charming, before she learned it was the same laugh he used when discussing business deals and livestock prices. "I'm marrying her for 50,000 acres of railroad land and access to the Whitmore shipping contracts. Love has nothing to do with it." "How terribly romantic." "Romance is for poor people who can't afford anything better." "And what about after?" When you're tired of her. Then I'll do what my father did with my mother. Keep her comfortable and out of the way. She'll learn her place eventually. They always do. Their voices faded as they moved back toward the ballroom, leaving only the faint strains of music and the sound of Eliza's ragged breathing. She realized her hands were shaking. Eliza, don't. She held up one hand, not trusting herself to look at Caleb. Just don't. You don't have to marry him. Yes, I do. The words came out flat, mechanical. My mother needs this. My family needs this. Your family needs you alive and sane more than they need railroad money. You don't know my mother. Eliza's voice cracked. You don't know what she's like. After my father died, she barely left her room for 6 months. She stopped eating, stopped speaking. The doctor said if she didn't have something to live for, she'd waste away completely. And then Theodore proposed, and suddenly she was alive again, planning the wedding, organizing the reception, talking about grandchildren. She needs this, Caleb. She needs to believe our family still matters, that we haven't lost everything. So you're going to sacrifice yourself to give your mother something to plan parties about? The cruelty of the statement made Eliza flinch, but it was also, she realized, fundamentally accurate. That's not fair, she whispered. None of this is fair. Caleb moved closer, his voice rough. But what are you going to do? Marry him? Spend the rest of your life being called a well-trained show dog by a man who sees you as a business transaction? Eliza finally turned to face him, and she saw something in his expression that made her chest ache, not pity, but fury. Pure, righteous anger on her behalf. No one had been angry for her in a very long time. I'm going to survive, she said quietly. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to smile and nod and play the perfect wife, and I'm going to survive. That's not living. No. She met his eyes. But it's safe. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The October wind rattled through the willow branches, sending dead leaves skittering across the terrace stones. Eliza wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the heavy silk of her gown. I'm leaving tomorrow, Caleb said finally, heading west to Colorado. There's land there, open country, space to build something real. He paused. You could come with me. The offer hung between them like a lit match. Eliza stared at him, trying to determine if he was serious or simply cruel. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. Caleb, I can't just run away with you. That's insane. Why? Because she gestured helplessly toward the glittering ballroom behind them. Because of everything. Because of my mother, my reputation, my family's name. Because I don't know you anymore. Because it's completely reckless and irresponsible and it scares you, he finished quietly. Of course it scares me. Good. He stepped closer, and she could see the lamplight reflected in his dark eyes. You should be scared, but you should be more scared of waking up 20 years from now and realizing you spent your entire life being afraid. Eliza's throat tightened. Why do you even care? Because 2 years ago you told me you'd rather die than live like me. His voice was steady, but she could hear the old wound beneath it. And now you're choosing to do exactly that. Die slowly in a gilded cage, married to a man who thinks you're livestock. So yeah, Eliza, I care, because you deserve better than that. Because you're smarter and stronger than anyone in that ballroom, and you're wasting it all on people who wouldn't cross the street to save your life. She wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that he didn't understand that real life didn't work like his romantic fantasies about the frontier. But the words wouldn't come. Because some part of her, the part she'd been desperately trying to silence for 6 months, knew he was telling the truth. I can't, she whispered. Caleb nodded slowly, like he'd expected this answer. Then I guess this is goodbye. He turned to leave, and Eliza felt something crack open inside her chest. Wait, he stopped. If I were to consider this, hypothetically, the words felt dangerous in her mouth, like tasting poison to see if it would kill her. What would it even look like? Caleb turned back, studying her face. Honestly? Honestly. Hard. Uncertain. Nothing like the life you know. He paused. But real. No lies, no performance, No pretending to be someone you're not just to make other people comfortable. Just you and me and whatever we can build together. That's not exactly a compelling sales pitch. I'm not trying to sell you anything, Eliza. I'm offering you a choice. A real one. He met her eyes. But you have to decide tonight, because tomorrow morning I'm gone and I'm not coming back. That's not enough time. Time's up. Theodore's voice cut through the night like a knife. He stood in the terrace doorway, his face flushed with wine and fury. Behind him, Eliza could see Catherine Delacroix and at least a dozen other party guests, all craning their necks to see what drama was unfolding. Perfect. Just perfect. Now she'd have an audience for whatever humiliation Theodore had planned. "Get away from my fiancé," Theodore said, his voice dangerous and slurred at the edges. She could tell he'd had at least 4 glasses of champagne, probably more. Caleb didn't move. "I'm having a conversation." "You're trespassing." Theodore descended the terrace steps, and Eliza saw 2 security guards materialize from the shadows. "And you're about to be removed." "Theodore, please," Eliza started, but he cut her off with a look. "Go inside, Eliza, now." Something about his tone, the casual assumption that she would obey without question, that she was his property to command, made the crack in Eliza's chest split wider. "No," she heard herself say. Theodore froze. "What?" "I said no." Her voice was steady now, clear. "I'm not going inside." The terrace had gone completely silent. Eliza could feel dozens of eyes on her, could practically hear the gossip already forming in people's minds. Eliza Whitmore, making a scene at the Vandermeer ball. How unbecoming. How unstable. Theodore's face darkened. He took a step toward her, and she could smell the alcohol on his breath. "Eliza, you're embarrassing yourself." "Am I?" She looked past him at the crowd in the doorway, at Catherine Delacroix with her smug smile, at all the people who had watched Theodore humiliate her for months and said nothing. "Or am I finally stopping you from embarrassing me?" "I don't know what you think you heard." "A well-trained show dog," Eliza said clearly, and Theodore went white. "Isn't that what you called me? Just now, when you were explaining to Catherine how you plan to lock me away in your country estate while you spend my family's money on your mistresses?" Catherine gasped dramatically. Someone in the crowd actually laughed, a sharp, nervous sound. Theodore's hand shot out and grabbed Eliza's wrist, hard enough to hurt. "You need to stop talking. Right now." Caleb moved like lightning. One moment he was standing 3 feet away, the next his hand was locked around Theodore's wrist, forcing him to release Eliza. "Don't touch her," Caleb said quietly, and there was something in his voice that made the security guards hesitate. Theodore yanked his arm back, his face purple with rage. "You have no right. Neither do you. She's my fiancée." "For now," Caleb said, and looked at Eliza. The question in his eyes was clear. Choose. Eliza's heart hammered. Her entire life hung in the balance. Everything she'd been taught, everything she'd been told was important, everything that was supposed to keep her safe. And on the other side, uncertainty, risk, freedom. She thought about waking up every morning next to a man who saw her as livestock. She thought about spending the rest of her life being decorative and silent and perfectly miserably safe. She thought about Theodore's hand on her wrist, the casual violence of it, the assumption that he could touch her however he wanted because she'd already been purchased. She thought about her mother's disappointed face when she learned Eliza had thrown away a perfectly good marriage to one of New York's wealthiest heirs. Then she thought about Catherine Delacroix's laughter, about Theodore calling her well-trained, about the next 40 or 50 years of her life spent playing the role of the grateful, obedient wife to a man who would never see her as anything more than a means to an end. Eliza took a deep breath and turned to face the crowd in the doorway. Her hands were shaking, but her voice came out steady. "The wedding is off." The gasps were immediate, a wave of shock rolling through the assembled guests. Someone dropped a glass. Mrs. Vandermeer put a hand to her chest like she was having a heart attack. Theodore grabbed for her again, but Caleb blocked him. "You're insane," Theodore hissed. "You're throwing away everything, your family, your future, your reputation." "No," Eliza said quietly. "I'm throwing away you." She slipped the engagement ring off her finger, a massive diamond that had always felt heavy and cold, and held it out to Theodore. When he didn't take it, she let it fall. It hit the terrace stones with a small, crystalline sound. "Eliza, don't be stupid," Theodore started, but she was already walking away. Caleb fell into step beside her, not touching, just there, a solid presence in the chaos. They walked through the crowd together, Eliza keeping her head high even as she heard the explosion of whispers behind them. She saw Mrs. Vandermeer's scandalized expression, saw Catherine Delacroix's mouth hanging open in shock, saw 100 familiar faces that would spend the next 6 months tearing her reputation to shreds. She didn't care. For the first time in her life, she didn't care what they thought. "You can't do this!" Theodore's voice rose behind her, high and desperate. "Your mother will disown you. Your family will have nothing. You'll be ruined." Eliza didn't turn around. She just kept walking, one foot in front of the other, her emerald gown swishing against the marble floors. They made it through the foyer, past the startled doorman, and out into the October night. A carriage waited at the curb, Caleb's, she assumed, though it was nothing like the polished vehicles the other guests had arrived in. It was simple, functional, the kind of carriage a working man would own. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Wherever you want." Caleb opened the carriage door. "I meant what I said. You have a choice." Eliza looked back at the Vandermeer mansion, lit up like a jewel box, full of people who would never forgive her for what she'd just done. She could see shadows moving in the windows, could hear Theodore's voice still shouting her name. She thought about her mother's house across town, where she'd spent the last 24 years learning to be small and agreeable and safe. She thought about the wedding dress hanging in her closet, white silk and Brussels lace, purchased at tremendous expense. She thought about the invitations that had already been sent, the cathedral that had been reserved, the reception planned down to the smallest detail. All of it, gone, destroyed in a single moment of defiance. Then she looked at Caleb, standing in the lamplight with his hand extended, offering her something she'd been too afraid to reach for 2 years ago. Not safety, but truth. "Colorado," she said, and took his hand. "Let's go to Colorado." She climbed into the carriage, her emerald dress pooling around her like water. The interior was plain but clean, nothing like the velvet-lined luxury she was used to. Caleb climbed in after her and rapped twice on the roof. The driver clicked to the horses, and they lurched forward into the darkness. Eliza didn't look back. Behind them, the Vandermeer ball erupted into chaos. Theodore shouting for security, guests spilling out onto the street, scandal blooming like wildfire. She could hear the commotion even from inside the carriage, could imagine the gossip spreading like plague. But inside the carriage, Eliza sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Not peace, not certainty, but possibility. "You know they'll destroy you for this," Caleb said quietly, watching her face in the dim light. "Your reputation, your standing, everything." "I know." "Your mother will disown you." "Probably. Theodore will make sure everyone believes the worst. He'll tell them you ran off with some nobody, that you were having an affair, that you've lost your mind." "Undoubtedly." Caleb studied her face in the dim light filtering through the carriage windows. "Any regrets yet?" Eliza thought about Theodore's hand on her wrist, about Catherine's laughter, about the champagne glass shattering and her own reflection in the shards, broken, scattered, finally visible. She thought about the look on Theodore's face when she'd let the ring fall, the shock, the fury, the wounded male pride of a man who'd never been told no in his entire privileged life. "Ask me again in a year," she said. The carriage rolled through the empty streets of Manhattan, carrying her away from everything she'd ever known. Eliza pressed her palm against the cool glass of the window, watching the familiar brownstones blur past. Gas lamps threw pools of yellow light across the cobblestones. A few late-night pedestrians hurried along the sidewalks, heads down against the October chill. This was the city she'd grown up in, the only world she'd ever known. And she was leaving it behind with nothing but the dress on her back and a man she barely knew anymore. Somewhere behind them, her old life was burning. And for the first time in months, Eliza Whitmore smiled. "Where are we going now?" she asked. "Tonight, I mean, before Colorado." "I have rooms at a boarding house on the east side," Caleb said. "Nothing fancy, but it's respectable. The landlady's a widow named Mrs. Chen. She won't ask questions. And tomorrow? Tomorrow we catch the morning train west. Chicago first, then Denver, then wherever the tracks end. He paused. I won't lie to you, Eliza. It's going to be hard. Colorado's not like New York. The territory's rough, the people rougher. There's no society balls, no servants, no soft life. Good, she said, and meant it. I'm tired of soft. Caleb smiled, a real smile this time, not the careful, guarded expression he'd worn at the Vandermeer estate. You might be the first society woman I've ever met who meant that. I'm not a society woman anymore. No, I guess you're not. The carriage turned down a narrow street lined with shops, a tailor, a baker, a pharmacy with dark windows. This wasn't the fashionable part of town. No grand mansions here, no carefully manicured parks, just ordinary people living ordinary lives. Eliza found it strangely comforting. Can I ask you something? She said. Anything. Why did you come back? After what I said to you 2 years ago, why would you ever give me another chance? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. The carriage wheels rattled over cobblestones, a rhythmic sound that filled the silence. Because I knew you were lying, he said finally. When you told me you'd rather die than live like me. I could see it in your eyes. You were terrified. Not of me, but of what choosing me would mean. What you'd have to give up, who you'd have to disappoint. And I understood that. I didn't like it, but I understood it. So you've been waiting 2 years for me to, what, change my mind? No. I left New York that same week, went out west, started building the life I told you about. I wasn't waiting for anything. He looked at her directly. But when I heard you were engaged to Theodore Ashford, I had to come back. Had to make sure you knew what you were choosing. Because if you were going to marry that bastard with your eyes wide open, fully aware of what kind of man he was, then fine. That was your choice. But if you were doing it because you thought you didn't have any other option, you wanted to give me one. Yeah. Eliza felt something warm and painful expand in her chest. That's either incredibly romantic or incredibly stupid. Probably both, Caleb admitted. But I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try. The carriage slowed, then stopped. Through the window, Eliza could see a narrow townhouse with a small sign hanging by the door. Rooms to let, clean and respectable. Mrs. Chen, proprietress. We're here, Caleb said. He opened the door and climbed out, then offered his hand to help her down. Eliza took it, gathering her emerald skirts carefully as she stepped onto the sidewalk. The street was quiet, empty except for a stray cat that watched them from the shadows. Caleb paid the driver, then led her up the steps to the front door. He knocked softly. It was past midnight, after all. And after a moment, the door opened to reveal a small Chinese woman in her 50s holding an oil lamp. Mr. Hawthorne, she said, her accent thick but her English clear. You are back early. I did not expect you until… She stopped, her eyes going wide as she took in Eliza's elaborate gown and diamond necklace. Oh, Mrs. Chen, this is Miss Whitmore. She'll be needing a room for the night. Something private, if you have it. Mrs. Chen looked between them, her expression unreadable. Then she stepped back, opening the door wider. Come in, please, quickly, before you catch cold. They stepped into a narrow hallway lit by gas lamps. The boarding house was clean and plain, with worn but well-maintained floors and simple furnishings. Nothing like the luxury Eliza was accustomed to, but there was something welcoming about it, lived in, real. I have a room on the 3rd floor, Mrs. Chen said, already moving toward the stairs. Very quiet, very private. It has its own wash basin. Will this be suitable? It will be perfect, Eliza said. Thank you. Mrs. Chen studied her for a moment, and Eliza had the distinct impression of being assessed and measured. Then the older woman nodded, apparently satisfied by whatever she saw. Follow me, please. They climbed 3 flights of narrow stairs, Mrs. Chen moving with surprising speed despite her age. At the top, she unlocked a door and ushered them into a small room with a single window overlooking the street. It was tiny, maybe a quarter the size of Eliza's dressing room back home. A narrow bed, a washstand, a single chair, and a small wardrobe. That was it. Eliza had never seen anything more beautiful. Thank you, Mrs. Chen, she said softly. The landlady nodded. There is water in the pitcher, clean linens on the bed. If you need anything, my room is on the 1st floor. She paused at the door, her eyes sharp. Mr. Hawthorne, you will be sleeping in your own room tonight, yes? Yes, ma'am. Good. I run a respectable house. She looked at Eliza. You are safe here, Miss Whitmore. No one will disturb you. After she left, Eliza stood in the center of the small room, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. The events of the evening crashed over her all at once. The confrontation with Theodore, the ruined engagement, the carriage ride through Manhattan. Her entire life had changed in the span of an hour. You should get some rest, Caleb said from the doorway. We have an early train to catch. Caleb? Yeah? Thank you for coming back, for giving me a choice. He smiled. Thank me when we get to Colorado. Ask me if I have any regrets when you're learning to cook over an open fire and hauling water from a well. Is it really that primitive? Sometimes. But it's also beautiful in a way this city will never be. You'll see. After he left, Eliza locked the door and leaned against it, her heart still racing. She moved to the small mirror above the washstand and stared at her reflection. She looked the same dark hair, same green eyes, same face she'd seen every morning for 24 years. But something fundamental had shifted. She could feel it, like the ground had moved beneath her feet and left her standing in an entirely different place. Slowly, carefully, she reached up and unclasped the diamond necklace. Theodore's mother's necklace, the Ashford family heirloom that had felt like a collar around her throat all evening. She set it on the washstand where it glittered coldly in the lamplight. Then she began the long process of unpinning her hair and unlacing her gown. It took 20 minutes. Normally her maid would do this, but Eliza didn't have a maid anymore. She didn't have anything except what she was wearing and the jewelry she'd been foolish enough to keep on. The emerald gown finally pooled at her feet, and she stood in her chemise and petticoats, staring at the expensive silk. It was beautiful, custom-made, worth more than most people earned in a year. She should feel something, she thought. Regret, maybe. Fear. Uncertainty about what she'd just done. Instead, she felt light, like she'd been carrying something impossibly heavy for months and had finally set it down. Eliza climbed into the narrow bed, pulling the clean but simple blanket up to her chin. Through the thin walls, she could hear the sounds of the boarding house. Someone coughing, footsteps on the stairs, the distant sound of voices. Normal sounds. Human sounds. She closed her eyes and for the first time in 6 months, slept without dreaming of Theodore Ashford's cold smile. When she woke, pale autumn sunlight was streaming through the window. For a moment, Eliza couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back. The ball, the confrontation, the carriage ride through Manhattan. She'd really done it. She'd actually walked away. Someone knocked softly on the door. Miss Whitmore, are you awake? Caleb's voice. Yes, she called, sitting up quickly. Give me a moment. She splashed water on her face from the wash basin, then realized with some dismay that she was still wearing her undergarments from last night. The emerald gown lay where she'd left it, impossibly impractical for travel. Another knock. Eliza, we need to leave for the station in 30 minutes. I brought you something to wear. She opened the door to find Caleb holding a bundle of clothes. Not a gown, but actual practical clothing. A simple brown dress, a warm cloak, sturdy boots. Where did you... Mrs. Chen, he said. She's about your size, or close enough. Said you couldn't very well travel west in an evening gown. Eliza took the clothes, feeling absurdly grateful. Thank Mrs. Chen for me, and tell her I'll pay her back as soon as... Already taken care of, Caleb interrupted gently. Get dressed. I'll wait downstairs. 20 minutes later, Eliza descended the stairs, wearing Mrs. Chen's borrowed dress and feeling more comfortable than she had in months. The fabric was plain cotton, nothing like the silk and satin she was used to, but it was warm, and it fit reasonably well. Mrs. Chen waited in the kitchen with coffee and bread. Eat, she commanded. It is a long journey to Colorado. Eliza sat at the simple wooden table, accepting the coffee gratefully. Mrs. Chen, I can't thank you enough. The older woman waved a dismissive hand. Mr. Hawthorne is a good man, good tenant, always pays on time, treats people with respect. If he says you need help, then you need help. She paused. And anyone who runs away from a bad marriage in the middle of a fancy ball deserves help. Eliza nearly choked on her coffee. How did you... New York is a small city, Miss Whitmore. Word travels fast.
By this morning, half of Manhattan knows you left Theodore Ashford at the Vandermeer estate. Mrs. Chen smiled slightly. The other half will know by noon. And what are they saying? Does it matter? Eliza thought about that. No, she said finally. I suppose it doesn't. Good. Then eat your breakfast and stop worrying about what foolish people think. By the time they left for the station, Eliza felt almost human again. She'd eaten, dressed in practical clothing, and reconciled herself to the fact that her reputation was thoroughly destroyed. Strangely, the knowledge felt freeing rather than terrifying. The morning train station was crowded with travelers, businessmen, families, workers heading west for jobs. Caleb purchased their tickets while Eliza waited near a pillar, trying to make herself inconspicuous. 2 tickets to Chicago, he said, returning with the papers. We'll catch a connection there to Denver. The whole journey will take about 4 days, maybe 5, depending on delays. 4 days, Eliza repeated. 4 days ago, she'd been planning her wedding. 4 days from now, she'd be in Denver, Colorado. The sheer unreality of it made her dizzy. You can still change your mind, Caleb said quietly. If you want to go back, I don't. The words came out firm, certain. I don't want to go back. Then let's go forward. They boarded the train just as the conductor called final boarding. Eliza found a seat by the window, watching as the platform slowly began to move. Or rather, as the train began to move and the platform fell away. Manhattan slid past the window. Familiar streets giving way to unfamiliar ones, the city she'd known her entire life receding into the distance. Caleb sat across from her, quiet and watchful. What are you thinking? He asked. Eliza watched the city disappear. That I should be more afraid than I am. And are you? Afraid? She considered the question honestly. Yes, but not of leaving. I'm afraid of what comes next, of failing, of discovering I can't actually do this. You can do this. You don't know that. I know you walked away from everything you'd ever known because you refused to spend your life being treated like property. That takes more courage than most people have. He leaned forward slightly. You'll be fine, Eliza. Better than fine. She wanted to believe him. Part of her did believe him. The other part wondered if she'd just made the worst mistake of her life. The train gathered speed, racing west toward Chicago and whatever lay beyond. Through the window, Eliza watched autumn landscapes blur past. Farms and forests, small towns and open country. Somewhere behind them, Theodore Ashford was probably nursing a spectacular hangover and planning his revenge. Her mother was probably having vapors, convinced her daughter had lost her mind. The society pages were probably already drafting their most vicious editorials. And Eliza Whitmore, formerly of Manhattan's finest families, was racing toward a future she couldn't predict with a man she'd once rejected. It was reckless. It was terrifying. It was, she realized with something like wonder, the first real choice she'd ever made in her entire life. She smiled and turned away from the window, meeting Caleb's eyes across the train car. Tell me about Colorado, she said. Tell me everything. And as the train carried them west, away from scandal and society and everything she'd ever known, Caleb began to talk. About mountains that touched the sky and air so clean it hurt to breathe. About land that had never known a plow. About building something from nothing. About the hard, beautiful work of creating a life that belonged to no one but yourself. Eliza listened, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something that might have been hope. And this time, the choice might cost her everything. Eliza read the letter again, her hand steadier now even as her heart raced. Theodore's words dripped with the same entitled arrogance she remembered, the absolute certainty that she would bend to his will because she always had before. He's not taking you back, Caleb said, his voice flat and dangerous in a way she'd never heard. I don't care what threats he makes. It's not that simple. Eliza folded the letter carefully, as if the precision of the movement could contain the panic rising in her chest. My mother's survival depends on those railroad contracts. If Theodore voids them out of spite, then your mother will have to find another way to survive, like you did. Caleb, no. He took the letter from her hands, his jaw set. You're not sacrificing yourself to save people who threw you away the moment you stopped being convenient. That's not happening. Sarah, who'd arrived just as the writer left and had been listening from the doorway, stepped inside. Theodore Ashford, The fiancé you humiliated at the Vandermeer ball? The same, Eliza said. And he's coming here? To redemption? Sarah let out a low whistle. That's bold. Stupid, but bold. What do you mean? Eliza asked. City men don't last long out here. They don't understand the rules, don't respect the land, think money solves everything. Sarah's smile was sharp. Colorado has a way of humbling people like that. He's not coming to be humbled, Eliza said quietly. He's coming to destroy me, to make sure everyone knows what happens when someone defies him. The thought made her sick. Theodore arriving in redemption with his money and his lawyers and his absolute conviction that Eliza belonged to him. The town already doubted her. What would they think when her wealthy ex-fiancé showed up claiming she'd stolen away in the night, abandoned her responsibilities, broken sacred promises? Ruth Morrison would have a field day. When's he arriving? Sarah asked. Within the week, he said. Then we have time. Sarah looked at Caleb. You two are planning to get married anyway, right? Do it now, today, before he gets here. A wedding won't stop him, Eliza said. No, but it'll complicate things. Harder for him to claim you as his property if you're legally married to someone else. Sarah paused. Plus, it'll force the town to take a side. Right now, you're just Caleb's woman living in sin. But if you're his wife, that changes the dynamic. Caleb looked at Eliza. What do you think? What did she think? 3 days ago, she'd agreed to marry him out of love and hope, and the fragile belief that she could build something real here. Now it felt like a tactical maneuver, a defensive position against an enemy who wouldn't stop until he'd won. But maybe that was fine. Maybe love and strategy could coexist. Let's do it, she said. Today, before I lose my nerve or Theodore arrives or anything else goes wrong. The preacher, a weathered man named Samuel Barrett, who spent more time farming than preaching, performed the ceremony in his small church that afternoon. No guests, no ceremony, no white dress or flowers, or any of the elaborate ritual Eliza had spent months planning for her wedding to Theodore. Just Caleb and Eliza, Sarah and Margaret as witnesses, and Samuel's halting words about commitment and partnership and the hard work of building a life together. Do you, Caleb Hawthorne, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. And do you, Eliza Whitmore, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Eliza looked at Caleb, at his honest face, his steady eyes, the calloused hands that had taught her how to survive. She thought about Theodore's smooth lies and calculated charm. She thought about the choice she was making and all the ones that had led her here. I do. Samuel pronounced them married. Caleb kissed her with surprising gentleness, and just like that, Eliza Whitmore became Eliza Hawthorne. Well, Margaret said afterward, at least now Ruth Morrison will have to find something else to gossip about. But word of the hasty marriage spread through redemption like wildfire, and the reaction wasn't what Eliza had hoped. Suspicious timing, she heard Ruth Morrison say outside the general store 2 days later. Getting married right before her rich fiancé arrives to reclaim her. Almost like she has something to hide. I heard she ran away with Hawthorne's money, another woman whispered, that she stole from her family in New York. Well, I heard she was already pregnant when she arrived. That's why they married so quickly. The rumors multiplied, each one more vicious than the last, and beneath them all ran a current of resentment. This outsider, this city woman who thought she was better than them, now claiming to be one of them through a marriage everyone suspected was a sham. Eliza tried to ignore it. She worked at Margaret's store, helped Caleb prepare for winter, practiced the 100 small skills that frontier life demanded. But the weight of the town's suspicion pressed down on her like a physical thing. They'll come around, Caleb kept saying. Will they? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. Theodore arrived on a cold Thursday morning, 6 days after his letter. Eliza was at the store when the stagecoach pulled up, and she knew immediately it was him. The coach was too fine, too polished for redemption. And when the door opened and Theodore stepped out, wearing an expensive suit and polished boots that had never seen a day of real work, she felt the past crash into the present like a collision. He looked exactly the same, handsome, confident, completely out of place. Eliza! He spotted her through the store window, and his face lit up with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. There you are. I've been so worried. She didn't move, didn't go outside to meet him,
just stood behind the counter, her heart hammering, while Theodore approached the store like he owned it. He walked in, looked around at the rough wooden shelves and simple goods, and couldn't quite hide his distaste. "My dear, what have you been reduced to? Working in a general store?" "I'm working for my living, something you've never done." Now, I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But I'm here to make things right." He glanced at Margaret, who was watching the exchange with narrowed eyes. "Perhaps we could speak privately?" "No." "Eliza, anything you want to say, you can say in front of Margaret." Theodore's smile tightened. "Very well. I've come to take you home. Your mother is beside herself with worry. Your brother has agreed to new contract terms with my family, but they require your cooperation. If you return to New York with me, we can put this unfortunate episode behind us, and I'm not going back to New York. Don't be childish. You've had your little adventure, made your point, but this frontier fantasy can't last. You're not built for this life." "You don't know what I'm built for. I know you're my fiancé." "I'm not your fiancé. I'm married." The words landed like a slap. Theodore's face went white, then red. "What?" "I married Caleb Hawthorne 6 days ago. We're legally wed, so whatever claims you think you have on me, they're void." For a moment, Theodore just stared at her. Then he laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You married the help? The land manager? Eliza, even for you, this is absurd." "Get out of my store," Margaret said quietly. Theodore ignored her, his attention fixed on Eliza. "This marriage is a fraud. You married him to spite me, to avoid your responsibilities. I'll have it annulled within the month." "On what grounds?" "Duress, coercion, mental instability, take your pick." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You can't run from me, Eliza. I have lawyers, resources, connections, and I have your family's financial future in my hands. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to come back to New York, you're going to apologize publicly for your behavior, and you're going to honor the commitments your family made. Or I'll destroy them. Your mother will lose everything. Your brother will be ruined, and it will be your fault." Eliza felt the old fear rise up, the trained response to Theodore's threats, the instinct to bend and comply and make herself small enough to avoid his anger. Then she looked at his expensive suit, his clean hands, his absolute confidence that she would obey, and something in her snapped. "No," she said. "I'm sorry?" "I said no. I'm not going back. I'm not apologizing, and I'm not letting you control my life anymore." Theodore's face darkened. "You're making a mistake." "The only mistake I made was ever agreeing to marry you in the first place." He straightened, his expression going cold. "I'll give you 24 hours to reconsider. If you're not on the stagecoach tomorrow, I'll start destroying your family's contracts, and then I'll destroy you." He walked out, letting the door slam behind him. Margaret waited until his footsteps faded, then said, "That man's dangerous." "I know." "You really not going back?" "No." "Even if it costs your family everything?" Eliza thought about her mother, who'd pushed her toward Theodore despite every red flag, about her brother who'd signed away her future without asking, about the life she'd left behind, the safety that had never actually been safe at all. "Yes," she said quietly. "Even then." That night, lying next to Caleb in the darkness of their cabin, Eliza couldn't sleep. She kept seeing Theodore's face, hearing his threats, imagining her mother's house being sold, her family's name dragged through scandal. "You're thinking too loud," Caleb murmured. "Sorry." He rolled over to face her. "Having second thoughts?" "About you? No. About everything else?" "Constantly. We could leave. Pack up, head further west. California, maybe. Or north to Montana. Run away again? Strategic retreat." Despite everything, Eliza smiled. "That's very diplomatic of you." "I'm a diplomatic guy." He paused. "But seriously, if Theodore's threats are real, if he can actually hurt your family, he can, and he will. That's who Theodore is. He doesn't make empty threats." "Then what do you want to do?" Eliza stared at the ceiling, watching shadows from the dying fire dance across the rough wooden beams. What did she want to do? The old Eliza would have surrendered by now, would have calculated the least damaging path and taken it. But she wasn't the old Eliza anymore. "I want to fight," she said. "I want to stand my ground and make him understand that I'm not his property."
not his pawn, not something he can manipulate and control. Okay? Okay? Yeah, then we fight. Just like that? Eliza, I didn't bring you all the way to Colorado just to hand you back to that bastard. Whatever you want to do, however you want to handle this, I'm with you. She kissed him then, fierce and grateful, and felt some of the fear ease. The next morning, Theodore made good on his threat. He set up in the saloon, the Red Horse, where Sarah worked, and began spreading his version of events to anyone who would listen. Eliza was mentally unstable, he said. She'd run away in the middle of the night, stolen family jewelry, abandoned her responsibilities. He was here to bring her home for her own good, to get her the help she clearly needed. She was always fragile, Eliza heard him telling a group of miners. The stress of planning the wedding must have broken her. It's tragic, really. Her family is devastated. Some people believed him. Why wouldn't they? He was well-dressed, well-spoken, clearly wealthy. And Eliza was just the strange woman from New York who'd shown up a month ago and married Caleb Hawthorne in what everyone agreed was suspiciously quick timing. But some people didn't believe him. Margaret listened to his speech in the saloon, then stood up and said loudly, "That's a load of horse shit." Theodore blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "You heard me. Horse shit. I've known Eliza for weeks now. She's not fragile. She's not unstable. And she didn't steal anything. She works hard, pays her debts, and minds her own business. Which is more than I can say for you, coming in here and spreading lies about a woman who had the good sense to leave you." Several people laughed. Theodore's face went purple. "You don't know what you're talking about. I know when a man's trying to manipulate folks, and I know when a woman's running from something that'll hurt her." Margaret crossed her arms. "So why don't you get back on that fancy stagecoach and head home? Eliza's made her choice clear." Theodore looked around the saloon, clearly expecting support, but people were looking at him with new skepticism, reassessing their first impressions. "This isn't over," he said to Margaret. Then, louder, "Eliza's family will be ruined because of her selfishness, and all of you will have enabled it." He stormed out, and the saloon erupted in conversation. Sarah found Eliza an hour later at the cabin. "Your ex-fiancé is making quite an impression." "Let me guess. He's telling everyone I'm insane?" That was the initial strategy, but Margaret shut that down pretty effectively. Sarah grinned. "You should have seen his face when she called his story horseshit in front of 20 people. Despite everything, Eliza laughed. "I wish I had." But he's not giving up. He's staying at the boarding house, asking questions, trying to find leverage. And he's got money. He's offering to pay people for information about you and Caleb. Information about what? Anything he can use. Proof the marriage is fake, evidence you're unfit, reasons to get you declared incompetent. Sarah's expression turned serious. He's building a case, Eliza, and if he gets enough people on his side, he might actually succeed. Then I need to get people on my side first. How? Eliza thought about it. She'd spent weeks trying to prove herself through quiet competence, through hard work, and keeping her head down. But quiet competence wasn't going to win against Theodore's money and manipulation. She needed to do something bold, something that would force the town to choose. "I need to call him out," she said, "publicly. Make him defend his claims in front of everyone." That's risky. Everything's risky. At least this way, I control when and where it happens. That evening, Eliza walked into the Red Horse Saloon during the busiest hour. The place was packed with miners, farmers, townspeople, and Theodore, holding court at a corner table with several men who looked like they might be lawyers or investigators. The conversation died when she walked in. "Theodore," she said clearly, "I hear you've been telling stories about me." He stood slowly, his face arranging itself into an expression of concern. "Eliza, I'm glad you came. I've been worried." "Save it. You're not worried about me. You're angry that I embarrassed you, and you're trying to drag me back to New York by destroying my reputation here." She looked around the saloon. "So let's settle this right now, in front of witnesses." Theodore's eyes narrowed. "I don't know what you think. You claim I'm mentally unstable, that I stole from my family, that I ran away in the night. Are those your accusations?" "I'm trying to help you. Answer the question." The saloon was dead silent, everyone watching. Theodore's mask slipped just for a second, and she saw the rage underneath. "Fine. Yes. You abandoned your family, stole valuable jewelry, and married some frontier nobody to avoid your responsibilities. You're acting like a child throwing a tantrum, and someone needs to stop you before you destroy everything. I didn't steal anything. The jewelry I wore the night I left was mine, gifts from my father. I didn't abandon my family. They abandoned me the moment I stopped being useful. And I married Caleb because I love him, because he treats me like a human being instead of livestock. Her voice was steady, strong. You're not here to help me, Theodore. You're here because your pride can't handle being rejected. Your family will be ruined. Then let them be ruined. I'm not sacrificing myself to save people who sold me to you like I was property. The words rang out in the silence. Eliza felt them settle, felt the weight of the choice she'd just made public and irrevocable. Theodore took a step toward her. You're going to regret this. No. The only thing I regret is ever believing you cared about anything but yourself. He moved fast, grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise, started pulling her toward the door. You're coming with me right now. Caleb appeared out of nowhere, his hand locking around Theodore's wrist with crushing force. Let her go. This doesn't concern you. She's my wife. It concerns me. Theodore tried to pull free, couldn't, and his face went dark with fury. You think you've won? You think stealing her away to this wasteland means anything? I'll destroy both of you. I'll make sure. The punch came from Sarah, not Caleb. She stepped forward and hit Theodore square in the jaw with surprising force. He stumbled back, shocked, and Sarah shook out her hand with a wince. That's for grabbing women without permission, she said. Now get out of our town. For a moment, Theodore just stood there, blood trickling from his split lip, staring at the crowd of hostile faces around him. These weren't Manhattan socialites who would smile and pretend not to notice. These were frontier people who'd watched him try to physically drag Eliza away and didn't like it one bit. This isn't over, Theodore said, his voice shaking with rage. Yes, it is, Margaret said from the bar. You've got until tomorrow morning to catch the stagecoach east. After that, you're not welcome here. Theodore looked at Eliza one last time. Your mother will suffer for this. Your family's name will be destroyed, and it will be your fault. Then that's my choice to make, Eliza said quietly. He left, and the saloon erupted in conversation. People clustered around Eliza, asking questions, offering support, treating her suddenly like one of them instead of a suspicious outsider. But Eliza barely heard them. She was thinking about her mother, about the inevitable letter that would arrive in a few weeks, telling her exactly how Theodore had made good on his threats, about the guilt she'd carry for choosing her own freedom over her family's security. Was it worth it? She looked at Caleb, at Sarah, at Margaret standing behind the bar with approval on her weathered face, at the rough wooden walls of the Red Horse Saloon, at the faces of people who'd just chosen to believe her over a wealthy man with every advantage. Yes, she thought, it was worth it. But the relief was short-lived. Theodore left the next morning, but before he boarded the stagecoach, he made one final gesture. He found Ruth Morrison and gave her a letter, sealed, addressed to Eliza, with instructions to deliver it only after he'd gone. Ruth brought it to the cabin that afternoon, her face pinched with disapproval. Mr. Ashford asked me to give you this, she said, handing over the envelope. He seemed quite distressed. After she left, Eliza opened it with shaking hands. Eliza, you think you've won. You think standing up to me in front of those frontier rabble means you're free. But you've forgotten something important. I still have the contracts. I still control your family's railroad shares, their shipping agreements, everything your father built. And as of this morning, I've instructed my lawyers to begin liquidating all of it. Your mother's house will be sold within the month. The railroad land will be auctioned. Your brother's debts, which I've been quietly covering, will come due immediately. By the time you receive this letter, the process will already be underway, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. You chose your freedom over your family. Now live with that choice. Theodore Eliza read it twice, then handed it to Caleb without speaking. His face went hard. He's bluffing. No, he's not. Eliza felt numb, distant. This is exactly what Theodore does. He finds your weakness, and he uses it until you break. Then we fight back. We find a lawyer, we contest the contracts. With what money? What legal standing? I'm a married woman now. Under the law, I have no rights to property. It all belongs to my husband, which means it all belonged to Theodore as my fiancé, and now it belongs to you as my husband.
Except none of that matters because James signed everything over before I left. She laughed, a broken sound. Theodore planned this perfectly. Every legal avenue is blocked. Caleb grabbed her shoulders. Listen to me. Your family's choices are not your responsibility. They sold you to Theodore. They put you in this position. You don't owe them. They're still my family. They threw you away. I know. The words came out as a scream. I know they did. I know my mother only cared about my value as a social asset. I know my brother gambled away everything my father built. I know I don't owe them anything. But they're still my family, Caleb. And now they're going to lose everything because of me. She broke down then, all the fear and guilt and rage pouring out in racking sobs. Caleb held her while she cried, not offering empty reassurances, just being there. When she finally stopped, exhausted and empty, she pulled back and wiped her face. I need to fix this, she said. How? I don't know yet, but there has to be a way. Over the next 3 days, Eliza tried everything she could think of. She wrote to lawyers in Denver, to her father's old business associates, to anyone who might be able to help. She searched through the cabin for any documents Caleb might have from his time managing her father's properties, hoping to find some legal loophole. Nothing worked. Theodore had been thorough. Every contract was ironclad, every legal avenue blocked. Her family's assets would be liquidated, and there was nothing she could do about it from a frontier cabin in Colorado. On the 4th day, a different letter arrived. This one was from her mother. Eliza, I hope you're satisfied. Theodore has done exactly what he promised. The house is being sold. The railroad shares have been transferred. Your brother is facing debtor's prison. You destroyed this family. You and your selfish need to rebel against the life we built for you. I have no daughter. Constance Whitmore. Eliza read the letter and felt something break inside her chest. Not her heart, that had already cracked when she'd walked away from Theodore. This was something deeper. The final severing of a connection that had been fraying for years. Her mother had disowned her. She should feel devastated. Instead, she felt strangely light. What does it say? Caleb asked. That I have no family anymore. Eliza set the letter down carefully. My mother's disowned me. Officially. I'm sorry. I'm not. The words surprised her, but they were true. I spent my whole life trying to be what she wanted, and it was never enough. I was never enough. So maybe this is better. At least now I know where I stand. Where do you stand? She looked around the cabin, at the simple furniture they'd built together, at the shelves lined with supplies they'd gathered for winter, at the life they'd started creating from nothing. Here, she said, I stand here. That night, the first real blizzard of winter hit Redemption. Eliza woke to the sound of wind screaming around the cabin, shaking the walls. Snow was coming in through gaps in the wood, piling up on the floor. The temperature had dropped so low she could see her breath even with the fire burning. We need to seal those gaps, Caleb shouted over the wind, or we'll freeze. They worked through the night, stuffing cloth and paper into every crack, feeding the fire constantly, huddling together for warmth. The storm raged for 36 hours, a wall of white that made the world disappear. When it finally passed, they emerged to find the town transformed. Snowdrifts reached the roofs of buildings. The road was completely impassable. 3 cabins on the edge of town had partially collapsed under the weight of snow, and Margaret's general store had burned down. Eliza saw the smoke first, a black column rising against the white landscape. She and Caleb ran toward town, arriving to find a crowd gathered around the smoldering ruins of the store. Margaret stood in the street, staring at the destruction with blank eyes. What happened? Eliza asked. Fire started during the storm, someone said. Maybe a spark from the stove, maybe lightning. By the time anyone noticed, it was too late. The whole building went up. Margaret turned to look at Eliza, and there were tears frozen on her weathered face. Everything I had was in that store. 20 years of work. Gone. The town rallied immediately. People brought food, offered shelter, promised to help rebuild in the spring. But everyone knew the truth. Without the store, Redemption was in trouble. It was the only source of supplies for 50 miles. Without it, people would have to make the dangerous journey to Denver for basic necessities. And winter had just begun. That night, Eliza lay awake thinking about the store, about Margaret's devastated face.
about the town that had finally started accepting her and was now facing its own crisis. An idea formed. Dangerous, probably impossible, but an idea nonetheless. "Caleb," she said into the darkness, "how much money do we have saved?" "Maybe $200. Why?" "And your land, the 160 acres. What's it worth?" "Eliza, what are you thinking?" She sat up, her mind racing.
Margaret needs money to rebuild the store. The town needs the store to survive the winter, and I need to do something that matters. Something that proves I belong here. You're going to give her our savings? I'm going to do better than that. Eliza turned to face him. My father's shipping company. Before he died, he had contacts all over the country. Suppliers, distributors, people who owed him favors. I know who they are. I know how to reach them. So I can get supplies shipped to redemption. Not just basic goods, but everything the store needs to reopen. Food, tools, fabric, medicine, everything. Her words came faster now, excitement building. And I can negotiate credit terms, use my father's name and reputation. It's the one thing Theodore can't take from me, my knowledge of how that business actually worked. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. That's risky. If the suppliers don't honor your father's name anymore, if they demand payment up front, then we'll figure it out. But I have to try. She grabbed his hand. This is my chance, Caleb, to prove I'm not just some useless city woman playing at frontier life. To actually help, to use the skills I have instead of just the ones I'm learning. What does Margaret think? I haven't asked her yet. Then maybe we start there. The next morning, Eliza found Margaret in the boarding house where she'd taken refuge. The older woman looked 10 years older, exhausted and defeated. Margaret, I have an idea. Unless it involves rebuilding my store with no money and no supplies, I'm not interested. Actually, that's exactly what it involves. Eliza laid out her plan, using her father's business connections to get supplies on credit, leveraging her knowledge of shipping and logistics to rebuild the store better than before. Margaret listened with increasing skepticism. That's a nice fantasy, girl, but your father's been dead for over a year. You think his suppliers are going to extend credit to his daughter? A daughter who ran away from her family and married a frontier farmer? They might, if I make it worth their while. With what? You don't have any collateral. Yes, I do. Eliza took a deep breath. I have information. I know which suppliers were overcharging my father, which ones were delivering inferior goods, which ones were involved in fraud. I know where the bodies are buried, Margaret, and I'm willing to use that knowledge to negotiate. Margaret's eyes sharpened. That's blackmail. That's business. For the first time since the fire, Margaret smiled. Maybe you're not as soft as I thought. They spent the next week writing letters, reaching out to every contact Eliza could remember from her father's business. She used his name shamelessly, invoked old debts and old loyalties, and when necessary, implied that she knew things that certain people would prefer stayed private. Some suppliers ignored her, others refused outright, but 3 responded positively. 3 suppliers who remembered Eliza's father, who owed him favors or feared his daughter's knowledge, who were willing to extend limited credit for a new venture in Colorado. It wasn't enough to rebuild the entire store, but it was a start. When the first shipment arrived 2 weeks later, a wagon loaded with flour, sugar, coffee, and basic tools, the whole town came out to watch. Margaret stood in the street, staring at the supplies, and then turned to Eliza with something like wonder in her eyes. You actually did it. We did it, Eliza corrected. This is just the beginning. But Ruth Morrison stepped forward, her face twisted with suspicion. How do we know she didn't steal this or use illegal means to acquire it? Does it matter? Sarah called from the crowd. The town needs supplies, and she got them. It matters if she's a criminal. She's not a criminal, Margaret said firmly. She's a businesswoman who used her connections to help this town survive. And anyone who's got a problem with that can freeze in their cabin without supplies. The crowd murmured agreement, and Ruth retreated, defeated but not silenced. Over the next month, 2 more shipments arrived. Eliza and Margaret worked together to set up a temporary store in the boarding house, selling goods at fair prices and extending credit to families who couldn't pay immediately. The town transformed. People who'd been suspicious of Eliza started seeking her advice. Women asked her to teach them to read and write contracts. Men wanted to know about business partnerships and trade agreements. Slowly, grudgingly, Redemption began to see her as one of their own. But on a frozen morning in late January, everything changed again. Eliza was at the temporary store when a rider came through town, a messenger from Denver with a telegram. She signed for it with shaking hands, already knowing it would be bad news. Eliza Hawthorne. Stop. Your brother James Whitmore found dead in London. Stop. Apparent suicide. Stop. Debts exceeded $50,000. Stop. Mother deceased week prior. Natural causes. Stop. No remaining family. Stop. Estate liquidated. Stop. Condolences. Stop. The words blurred. Eliza read them again, trying to make them mean something different. Her brother, dead. Her mother, dead. She'd spent so much energy being angry at them, being hurt by their choices, fighting to be free of their expectations. And now they were just gone. Eliza? Margaret's voice seemed to come from very far away. What is it? She handed over the telegram, unable to speak. Margaret read it, her face going soft. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. I'm not. The words came out automatic, defensive. They chose this. They chose Theodore and his money over me. They chose... Her voice broke. I'm not sorry. But she was lying, and they both knew it. That night, Eliza stood outside the cabin in the frozen darkness, staring up at stars that seemed close enough to touch. Caleb had tried to talk to her, to offer comfort, but she'd sent him away. She needed to be alone with this grief that felt too complicated to share. Her mother was dead. Her brother was dead. Her family was gone. And she'd chosen this. She'd chosen freedom over duty, her own life over theirs. She'd known there would be consequences, but she hadn't imagined they would be this final. It's not your fault. She turned to find Sarah approaching through the snow, carrying a bottle of whiskey. How did you know I was out here? Caleb said you needed space. I figured you also needed this. Sarah held out the bottle. Eliza took it, drank, felt the burn all the way down. My brother killed himself because I left, she said quietly. My mother died probably thinking I'd destroyed everything she worked for. That's on me, Sarah. That's my choice. No, their choices are on them. Sarah took the bottle back, took her own drink. Your brother gambled away a fortune. Your mother sold you to a monster. Those were their decisions, Eliza, not yours. But if I'd just... What? Married Theodore? Let him abuse you for the next 40 years? Destroyed yourself to save people who never valued you? Sarah's voice was sharp. That's survivor's guilt talking, and it's horse shit. You don't understand. I understand that you were drowning and you swam to shore, and now you're feeling guilty that other people chose to keep drowning. Sarah looked at her directly. But you can't save people who don't want to be saved. You can only save yourself. The words hit Eliza like a physical blow, because they were true. Because she'd known they were true even when she'd made the choice to leave. She'd saved herself, and her family had paid the price. I have to live with that, she said. Yeah, you do, but you don't have to live with it alone. They stood together in the frozen night, passing the bottle back and forth, not speaking, and slowly Eliza felt something ease. Not the grief. That would stay. But the crushing weight of guilt began to lift just a little. She'd made her choice. She'd chosen herself. And terrible as the consequences were, she couldn't regret it. She wouldn't regret it. A week later, one final letter arrived. This one was from Theodore's lawyer, and it contained documents that made Eliza's hands shake as she read them. All of her family's remaining assets, a small amount of money left after the liquidation, had been transferred to her name. Theodore had kept none of it. Instead, he'd made sure it went to Eliza, with a note attached. So you can live with what you've cost them. It was $5,000, more money than most people in Redemption would see in a lifetime. Blood money. Guilt money. A final twist of the knife. Eliza stared at the bank draft for a long time. Then she made a decision. She took the money to Margaret the next morning. Use this to rebuild the store properly, she said. Not a temporary solution, but a real building. Stone foundation, solid roof, enough space for proper inventory. Margaret looked at the amount and her eyes went wide. Eliza, this is a fortune. Where did you... It is from my family's estate, the last of it. Eliza's voice was steady. They're gone. But this money can help build something that matters, something that helps people survive. That seems like a better legacy than anything else they left behind. Are you sure? I'm sure. By spring, a new general store stood in the center of Redemption, larger than the old one, built to last, with Fletcher and Hawthorne Mercantile painted across the front. Eliza stood looking at it, Caleb's arm around her shoulders, and felt something settle in her chest. She'd lost her family. She'd lost her old life. She'd lost certainty and safety and every comfortable lie she'd ever been told. But she'd gained something too. A partner who saw her as an equal. A community that valued her skills. A life built on truth instead of performance. Any regrets? Caleb asked softly. Eliza thought about the question carefully. About Theodore and Manhattan and everything she'd left behind. About her mother and brother and the guilt she'd carry forever. About the woman she'd been and the woman she'd become. Ask me again in a year, she said, and smiled. But that night, as she locked up the new store and prepared to head home, a man stepped out of the shadows. He was tall, scarred, wearing a marshal's badge. Eliza Hawthorne. Yes? I have a warrant for your arrest. You're wanted in New York for theft, fraud, and conspiracy. Come quietly, and this won't be difficult. Eliza's world tilted. What? That's impossible. Theodore Ashford filed charges 3 months ago. Says you stole $50,000 worth of railroad bonds. And I've got documentation that says you're right. The marshal's hand moved to his gun. So we can do this easy or hard, ma'am. Your choice. So we can do this easy or hard, ma'am. Your choice. Eliza stared at this marshal, her mind racing through 1,000 calculations. Run, fight, scream for help. Every option felt like a trap. I didn't steal anything, she said, keeping her voice steady even as her heart hammered. Theodore Ashford is lying. That's for a court to decide. Right now, I've got a warrant and I've got a job to do. The marshal's hand stayed on his gun. Are you coming peacefully? Let me see the warrant. He pulled a folded document from his coat and handed it over. Eliza read it by the fading light and felt sick. The charges were detailed, specific. $50,000 in railroad bonds, allegedly taken from the Ashford family safe the night she'd fled New York. There were witness statements, documentation, everything needed to make the case look legitimate. Theodore had planned this perfectly. One final trap, sprung just when she'd started to believe she was safe. This is fabricated, she said. I never had access to any safe. I left with nothing but the clothes on my back. Then you'll have no trouble proving that in court. In New York? Where Theodore owns half the judges? Eliza's laugh was bitter. I wouldn't last a week before I was convicted. That's not my concern. The marshal reached for her arm. Now, are we doing this? Touch her, and you'll lose that hand. Caleb stepped out of the growing darkness, and he wasn't alone. Sarah stood beside him, along with Margaret, and behind them at least 20 people from Redemption. They formed a loose semicircle around the marshal, their faces hard. The marshal's hand dropped from his gun. This is official business. Federal warrant. You're all interfering with— Show me your credentials, Margaret demanded. I just showed the warrant, not the warrant. Your credentials, your badge, your papers. Proof you're actually a federal marshal and not some hired thug. The marshal's jaw tightened, but he pulled out a leather wallet and showed his badge. It looked legitimate, but Margaret studied it with narrow eyes. Marshal Wade Hendricks, she read aloud. Out of Denver. Long way to come for an arrest warrant. Who's paying your expenses? That's none of your— Theodore Ashford, Eliza said quietly. He's paying you, isn't he? To bring me back to New York, where he can destroy me properly. Hendricks's silence was answer enough. Thought so, Margaret said. Here's what's going to happen, Marshal. You're going to let Eliza go, you're going to return to Denver, and you're going to tell Theodore Ashford that Redemption doesn't hand over its people to rich bastards playing games with the law. I have a legal warrant. You have a piece of paper signed by a New York judge who's probably in Ashford's pocket. Out here, that doesn't mean much. Margaret crossed her arms. And even if it did, you'd need to get Eliza back to Denver first. That's a 3-day journey through winter conditions. A lot of things can happen on a journey like that. People get lost. Wagons break down. Prisoners escape. The threat was barely veiled. Hendricks looked around at the crowd of hostile faces and seemed to recalculate his odds. You're making a mistake, he said. Wouldn't be the first time, Sarah said cheerfully. Hendricks stared at Eliza for a long moment. This isn't over. Ashford will send someone else. And next time it won't be just one marshal. The next time, we'll be ready, Caleb said. After Hendricks left, escorted to the edge of town by a group of armed men who made it very clear he wasn't welcome to return, the crowd dispersed slowly. But several people stopped to speak to Eliza first. Don't you worry about that New York snake, Tom Garrison said. We won't let him take you. You've earned your place here, another woman added. That store you helped build? That saved lives this winter. We don't forget things like that. Even Ruth Morrison, who'd spent months making Eliza's life difficult, paused on her way past. I still don't like you, she said, but I like rich men trying to buy justice even less. So I suppose I'm on your side now. Heaven help me. After everyone left, Eliza stood in the street with Caleb and Sarah, trying to process what had just happened. They stood up for me, she said, her voice unsteady. The whole town just stood up for me. Of course they did, Sarah said. You're one of us now. But I've only been here 6 months. Doesn't matter how long you've been here. Matters what you've done since you arrived. Sarah squeezed her shoulder. You proved yourself, Eliza. Now stop being surprised that people noticed. That night, lying beside Caleb in the darkness, Eliza couldn't sleep. Her mind kept replaying the confrontation, kept seeing Theodore's final trap springing closed around her. He's not going to stop, she said quietly. I know. Hendricks was right. Theodore will send more people, more marshals, more lawyers, more pressure. Eventually someone will succeed in taking me back to New York. Not if we fight back. Eliza rolled over to face him. How? We don't have resources. We don't have legal standing. We don't have anything except a town full of people who don't want to see me arrested. Then we get what we need. Caleb's voice was firm. We find proof that Theodore fabricated those charges. We expose him for what he is. From Colorado. How exactly do you propose we do that? I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. A woman stepped off of the stagecoach from Denver, tall, elegant, probably in her 50s, wearing a traveling suit that was practical but clearly expensive. She looked around Redemption with sharp, assessing eyes, then walked directly to the new Fletcher and Hawthorne Mercantile. Eliza was behind the counter when she entered. Are you Eliza Hawthorne, formerly Eliza Whitmore? Yes. Who are you? Catherine Morrison. I was your father's lawyer. She set a leather case on the counter. And I've traveled a very long way to speak with you about Theodore Ashford's fraud. Eliza's breath caught. What? May we speak somewhere private? They went to the back room where Catherine opened her case and pulled out a thick folder of documents. Your father was my client for 15 years, she began. When he died, I handled the estate. Your brother James was not a competent administrator. He made a series of catastrophic decisions, including entering into business agreements with Theodore Ashford that were, frankly, designed to destroy your family's wealth. I know all this, but what you don't know is that I kept records. Detailed records of every meeting, every contract, every fraudulent transaction Theodore pushed through. I documented it all, knowing that someday it might matter. Catherine pulled out a ledger, including proof that Theodore Ashford stole $50,000 in railroad bonds from his own family's safe and framed you for it. Eliza stared at the ledger. How do you have proof of that? Because Theodore is arrogant and sloppy. He had his secretary draft the theft report before you even left New York, dated it for the night of the Vandermeer ball. But I have the original draft in the secretary's handwriting, dated 3 days earlier. He planned to frame you from the beginning. Why are you telling me this? Why help me? Catherine's face softened. Because your father was a good man who treated people fairly. Because I watched Theodore Ashford systematically destroy his legacy. And because no woman should be dragged back to New York to face false charges brought by a vindictive ex-fiancé. She pushed the folder across the table. This is everything you need to fight him. Proof of fraud, proof of the false charges, proof that he's been manipulating your family's assets for years. Eliza picked up the folder with shaking hands. This could clear my name. More than that, this could destroy Theodore. If you take this to the right authorities, he'll be the one facing criminal charges. Why didn't you do this yourself? Why travel all the way to Colorado? Because I'm just a lawyer. But you?
You're the woman who walked away from Theodore Ashford in front of 300 witnesses. You're the woman who survived 6 months on the frontier and built a successful business. You're someone people will listen to. Catherine smiled slightly. I'm giving you ammunition, Eliza. What you do with it is up to you. After Catherine left, Eliza spread the documents across the table and began reading. The evidence was meticulous, damning. Theodore had stolen from his own family, falsified records, bribed officials, and framed Eliza for all of it. She had him. What are you going to do? Caleb asked that evening, after she'd explained everything. I'm going to fight back. I'm going to take this evidence to the federal authorities in Denver and file charges against Theodore for fraud, theft, and conspiracy. That's dangerous. Theodore has powerful friends. I don't care. Eliza's voice was steel. I'm done running. I'm done letting him control my life through fear. If I'm going to live here, if I'm going to build something real in redemption, I need to end this. Permanently. Sarah, who'd been listening from the doorway, grinned. Now you're talking. When do we leave for Denver? We? You think I'm letting you face this alone? Please. I've been waiting 6 months for a chance to watch you destroy that bastard. They left for Denver 3 days later. Eliza, Caleb, and Sarah, carrying Catherine Morrison's documents in a locked case. The journey took 4 days through melting snow and mud, but they arrived at the federal courthouse on a cold March morning. The prosecutor was a man named Daniel Wells, and he listened to Eliza's story with increasing interest. These are serious charges, he said, reviewing the documents. If even half of this is accurate, Theodore Ashford is looking at federal prison. It's all accurate, Eliza said. Catherine Morrison documented everything. And you're willing to testify? Under oath, in open court, knowing that Theodore will do everything in his power to discredit you? Yes. Wells studied her for a long moment. You understand this will be ugly. Theodore will hire the best lawyers money can buy. They'll attack your character, your reputation, your decisions. They'll make you look like a vindictive ex-fiancé trying to destroy an innocent man. Let them try. Mrs. Hawthorne, I admire your courage, but I need you to understand what you're walking into. I understand perfectly. Eliza leaned forward. Theodore Ashford spent 6 months trying to destroy me. He framed me for crimes I didn't commit. He threatened my family. He sent marshals to drag me back to New York. And I'm done being afraid of him. So either you file these charges, or I'll find someone who will. Wells smiled slightly. I'll file the charges. But it'll take time, weeks, maybe months to build a proper case. I have time. And you'll need to stay in Denver for depositions, pretrial hearings, all of it. Can you do that? Eliza looked at Caleb, who nodded. We'll make it work. They rented rooms in a Denver boarding house and settled in for what they knew would be a long fight. Eliza spent hours with Wells and his team, going through every document, every piece of evidence, building an ironclad case against Theodore. But Theodore wasn't sitting idle. 2 weeks after the charges were filed, his lawyers descended on Denver like a plague. They filed motions to dismiss, challenged the evidence, demanded delays. They hired investigators to dig up dirt on Eliza, to find any weakness they could exploit, and they started spreading rumors. I heard she was Theodore's mistress, someone whispered in the courthouse hallway. That she got pregnant and demanded money to stay quiet. I heard she stole more than $50,000, that she's been living in luxury in Colorado on stolen funds. I heard she's not even legally married, that the marriage to Hawthorne is a fraud. The rumors multiplied, each one more vicious than the last. Eliza tried to ignore them, but they wore on her like water on stone, constant and eroding. Don't let them see it bothers you, Sarah advised. That's what they want, to break you down before you even get to trial. It's working. No, it's not. You're still standing, aren't you? Still fighting. Barely. Then that's enough. The preliminary hearing was set for late April. Eliza arrived at the courthouse to find it packed with spectators, reporters, and curiosity seekers. Theodore sat at the defense table, looking calm and confident, flanked by 3 expensive lawyers. He didn't look at Eliza once. The hearing lasted 2 days. Theodore's lawyers argued that the charges were baseless, that Eliza was a scorned woman seeking revenge.
that every piece of evidence was circumstantial or fabricated. But Daniel Wells was relentless. He presented document after document, the original draft of the theft report, banking records showing Theodore's suspicious transactions, testimony from witnesses who'd seen him accessing the family safe. On the second day, Wells called Eliza to the stand. "Mrs.
Hawthorne, can you describe the night you left New York?" Eliza took a breath and began. She told the story carefully, precisely. The Vandermeer ball, Theodore's betrayal, the decision to leave. She explained that she'd taken nothing with her except the clothes she wore and jewelry that had been gifts from her father. "And did you, at any time, have access to the Ashford family safe?"
No. I was never given access, never told the combination, never even saw it." "So you could not have stolen these bonds?"
"No, I could not." Theodore's lead lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Winters, stood for cross-examination. "Mrs. Hawthorne, isn't it true that you fled New York in the middle of the night to avoid your responsibilities?" "I left to escape an abusive engagement." "Abusive? Can you provide any evidence of abuse?" "Emotional manipulation, public humiliation, treating me as property rather than a person, none of which is illegal, Mrs. Hawthorne.
You simply didn't like your fiancé's behavior, so you ran away. Correct?"
"I left because remaining would have destroyed me."
"How dramatic. And in leaving, you destroyed your family instead. Your brother committed suicide. Your mother died of grief, both dead because of your selfish actions." Daniel Wells shot to his feet. "Objection! Counsel is badgering the witness. Sustained. Mr. Winters, stick to the charges at hand." But the damage was done. Eliza felt the words like physical blows. The courtroom murmured, whispers spreading like wildfire. Winters pressed on. "You claim you took nothing from New York, yet somehow you arrived in Colorado with enough resources to invest in a business. Where did that money come from?" "I worked for it. I earned wages at a general store, wages that would have amounted to perhaps $20 a month. Yet you invested thousands in this mercantile." "So where did the rest come from?" "From my family's estate. After they died, the remaining assets were transferred to me." "Remaining assets from an estate that Theodore Ashford claims you looted. How convenient." "That's a lie." "Is it? Or is this entire case just an elaborate scheme to cover up your own theft?" "No. You hated Theodore Ashford. You publicly humiliated him. You destroyed your engagement out of spite. And now you're trying to destroy him legally because he had the audacity to hold you accountable for your crimes." "That's not true." But Winters was already sitting down, looking satisfied. After the hearing, Daniel Wells pulled Eliza aside. "That was rough, but you held up well." "I sounded defensive, guilty." "You sounded human. That's not a bad thing." He paused. "The judge will rule in a week, but I think we have a good chance." The week crawled by. Eliza stayed in Denver, unable to eat, barely sleeping, replaying the hearing over and over in her mind. Had she said the right things? Had she seemed credible? Or had Theodore's lawyers successfully painted her as a vengeful ex-fiancée making false accusations? The ruling came on a Tuesday morning. The judge, a stern woman named Patricia Caldwell, read from her decision in a flat, emotionless voice. Having reviewed the evidence and testimony presented, this court finds sufficient cause to proceed to trial on the charges against Theodore Ashford. The defendant will face criminal trial for fraud, theft, and conspiracy. Bail is set at $100,000. The courtroom erupted. Theodore's face went white. His lawyers immediately began arguing, but Judge Caldwell silenced them with a look. "Furthermore," she continued, "this court finds the arrest warrant issued for Eliza Hawthorne to be fraudulent and based on falsified evidence. The warrant is hereby vacated and all charges dismissed." Eliza felt her knees go weak. Caleb grabbed her arm, steadying her. She was free. The charges were dropped. Theodore was the one facing trial now. They'd won. Not completely. The trial itself would take months, maybe longer. But they'd won the first battle. They'd proven that Theodore wasn't untouchable, that his money and connections couldn't protect him from justice. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed them. Eliza answered questions carefully, precisely, making sure every word could be printed without distortion. "Mrs. Hawthorne, what do you say to people who claim this is just revenge?" "I say that truth isn't revenge. Theodore Ashford committed crimes, and he needs to be held accountable. Will you be pressing civil charges as well? That depends on the outcome of the criminal trial.
What message do you have for other women in situations like yours? Eliza paused, considering the question carefully. Don't be afraid to walk away. Don't let anyone convince you that safety means accepting abuse. And don't ever believe that wealth or status puts someone above the law. The interview appeared in newspapers across the country.
The story spread. The society woman who'd fled her engagement, built a new life on the frontier, and then fought back against the man who'd tried to destroy her. Some papers painted her as a hero. Others called her a troublemaker, a hysteric, a woman who'd stepped out of her proper place. Eliza didn't care. She'd told her truth. What people did with it was their choice. They returned to Redemption in late May, just as spring was transforming the harsh landscape into something almost gentle. The town welcomed them back with a celebration. Nothing formal, just people gathering at the saloon to drink and talk and hear the story firsthand.
So you really got him? Tom Garrison asked. Theodore Ashford's really going to prison?
If the trial goes the way it should, yes.
And you're staying here? In Redemption?
Where else would I go? The question seemed to satisfy something in the crowd. Eliza was staying. She'd had a chance to return to her old life, to reclaim some version of the status she'd left behind, and she'd chosen to come back instead. That meant something. Over the next months, as summer turned the prairie green and the new mercantile flourished, Eliza felt the last pieces of resistance from the town fade away. People stopped questioning her motives or her marriage. They stopped treating her like an outsider who might leave at any moment. She was simply Eliza Hawthorne, co-owner of Fletcher and Hawthorne Mercantile, wife to Caleb, part of Redemption. The trial in New York began in September. Catherine Morrison kept Eliza updated through regular letters. Theodore's lawyers were fighting hard, but the evidence was overwhelming. Witnesses testified to his fraud, his manipulation, his systematic theft from his own family. In November, the verdict came, guilty on all counts. Theodore Ashford was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. When the news reached Redemption, Sarah organized a party at the Red Horse. The whole town showed up, celebrating not just Theodore's conviction, but something larger. The idea that justice could actually work, that powerful men could be held accountable, that one woman's courage could make a difference. Eliza stood at the edge of the celebration, watching people dance and drink and laugh, and felt something settle in her chest. Not peace exactly. She'd never fully escaped the guilt over her family's deaths, the complicated grief over her mother and brother, but something like resolution. "You did it," Caleb said, appearing beside her with 2 glasses of whiskey. "We did it," she corrected. "I couldn't have survived this without you, without everyone here. You're tougher than you think."
Maybe.
Or maybe I just got lucky." "Luck had nothing to do with it." Caleb handed her a glass. "You made a choice back in New York. And then you kept making that same choice over and over every time things got hard. That's not luck. That's character." Eliza looked around the saloon, at Margaret laughing with Tom Garrison, at Sarah dancing with a cowboy twice her size, at Ruth Morrison actually smiling for once, at the life she'd built from nothing but determination and stubborn refusal to quit. "I spent so long being afraid," she said quietly. "Afraid of losing my family's approval, afraid of poverty, afraid of being alone. And then I lost everything I was afraid of losing, and I survived anyway. More than survived." "Yeah," she smiled. "More than survived." The next morning, Eliza woke early and walked out to watch the sunrise over the prairie. The land rolled away in every direction, vast and beautiful and indifferent. A year ago, this landscape had terrified her. Now it felt like home. She heard footsteps and turned to find Caleb approaching with coffee. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "Didn't want to. Wanted to see this." She gestured at the sunrise painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. They stood together in silence, drinking coffee and watching the day begin. In the distance, Eliza could see the Fletcher and Hawthorne Mercantile, solid and real. She could see the town waking up, smoke rising from chimneys, people beginning their morning routines. She'd built this. Not alone, but she'd been part of building it. And that mattered. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked. "That I was wrong." "About what?" "About everything. about safety, about what makes a good life, about what I was capable of. She turned to face him. I thought security meant marriage to someone wealthy. I thought survival meant making myself small and agreeable. I thought I needed other people to validate my worth. And now? Now I know that real security comes from being able to take care of yourself. That survival means fighting for what matters. And that the only validation I need is my own. She paused. It took losing everything to figure that out, but I'm glad I did. Any regrets? It was the same question he'd asked a year ago, the night they'd fled Manhattan. Back then, she hadn't known how to answer. Now she did. No, Eliza said firmly. No regrets. A rider appeared on the horizon, approaching fast. As he got closer, Eliza recognized the postal carrier from Denver. Mrs. Hawthorne, he called out, pulling his horse to a stop. Got a telegram for you, marked urgent. Eliza took the telegram with a sense of foreboding. After everything with Theodore, urgent telegrams made her nervous. She opened it and read, Theodore Ashford escaped federal custody. Stop whereabouts unknown, stop considered armed and dangerous. Stop exercise extreme caution. Stop. Her hands started shaking. Caleb read over her shoulder, his face going hard. When did he escape? Eliza checked the date on the telegram. 3 days ago. Then he could already be... A gunshot cracked across the morning air. Eliza spun around and saw Theodore standing 50 yards away, holding a rifle. His prison clothes were torn and filthy, his face gaunt, his eyes wild. You destroyed my life, he screamed. Everything I built, everything I was, gone because of you. Theodore, put down the gun. No. He raised the rifle, pointing it directly at her. You took everything from me, so now I take everything from you. Time seemed to slow. Eliza saw his finger tighten on the trigger, saw Caleb moving, trying to push her out of the way, saw Sarah running from the mercantile, shouting something Eliza couldn't hear. The rifle fired. But Theodore's aim was wild, desperate. The bullet went wide, slamming into the ground 5 feet from where Eliza stood. Before he could fire again, Tom Garrison tackled him from the side. He'd been working near the edge of town and had sprinted over when he heard the shot. The rifle went flying. Theodore fought like a cornered animal, but Tom was bigger, stronger, and angrier. Within seconds, half the town had converged. They dragged Theodore to his feet, his face bleeding, his expensive suit ruined. You're insane, Theodore spat at Eliza. You always were. You'll destroy everyone who gets close to you, just like you destroyed your family. Margaret slapped him hard enough that his head snapped to the side. That's enough out of you, she said calmly. They locked Theodore in the town's small jail, really just a reinforced storage shed, while they waited for the federal marshals to arrive and take him back to prison. Eliza stood outside the jail, staring at the man who'd controlled her life for so long. He looked pathetic now, desperate, nothing like the confident manipulator she'd known in New York. You happy now? Theodore asked through the bars. You've won. You've destroyed me completely. Does it feel good? Eliza thought about the question. Did it feel good? No, it felt necessary. It felt like justice, but it didn't feel good. I didn't destroy you, Theodore, she said quietly. You destroyed yourself. I just stopped letting you destroy me in the process. She walked away, leaving him shouting obscenities at her back. When the marshals arrived 2 days later, they took Theodore away in chains. Eliza watched the prison wagon disappear toward Denver and felt a chapter of her life finally, definitively close. He was gone. The threat was gone. She was free. That night, the town gathered again at the Red Horse, not to celebrate Theodore's capture, but to celebrate something else. The fact that redemption had protected one of their own. The fact that they'd stood together against a threat and won. Ruth Morrison approached Eliza at the bar. I owe you an apology, she said stiffly. I judged you unfairly, made assumptions based on gossip and suspicion instead of giving you a fair chance. It's fine. It's not fine. You've proven yourself 10 times over, and I was too stubborn to see it. So I'm saying it now. I was wrong about you, Eliza Hawthorne, and I'm glad you're part of this community. Coming from Ruth, that was basically a declaration of undying friendship. Thank you, Eliza said sincerely. As the party wound down, Eliza found herself standing outside with Caleb and Sarah, looking up at stars that still seemed impossibly bright. "You know what the best part of all this is?" Sarah said. "What?" "You won. Not just against Theodore, but against everyone who said you couldn't make it. Against the system that tried to keep you trapped. Against your own fear." She raised her glass. "To Eliza Hawthorne, the woman who rewrote her own story." They clinked glasses, and Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. She'd come to Colorado broken, desperate, running from a life that would have slowly killed her. And she'd rebuilt herself into something stronger, something real. The journey had cost her family, her reputation, her old identity. But it had given her something infinitely more valuable, the knowledge that she could survive anything. The journey had cost her family, her reputation, her old identity. But it had given her something infinitely more valuable, the knowledge that she could survive anything. 3 years passed. Eliza stood on the porch of the home she and Caleb had built. Not the original cabin, but a real house with multiple rooms, glass windows, and a foundation that would last generations. The Fletcher and Hawthorne Mercantile had expanded twice, now employing 6 people and serving settlements as far as 50 miles away. The railroad had finally reached redemption last spring, transforming the isolated frontier town into a legitimate trading hub. She was 28 years old, and she barely recognized the woman she'd been at 24. "Mrs. Hawthorne?" A young woman approached hesitantly. Mary Collins, barely 19, wearing a dress that had seen better days. "I'm sorry to bother you, but Margaret said you might be able to help." "Help with what?" Mary's hands twisted together nervously. "My father wants me to marry William Tucker. He's 43, been married twice before, and he drinks. But father says we need the money from the bride price, and I don't have any choice." Eliza felt something sharp twist in her chest. She knew this story. She'd lived a version of it. "Come inside," she said. "Let's talk." Over coffee at the kitchen table, Mary poured out her situation. Her family was drowning in debt. William Tucker had offered to pay handsomely for a young wife. Her father had already agreed to the arrangement. "I don't want to marry him," Mary whispered. "But what choice do I have? I can't support myself. I have no skills, no money, nowhere to go." "You have choices," Eliza said firmly. "They might not be easy choices, but they exist." "Like what?" "Like learning a trade. Margaret's always looking for help at the store. I can teach you bookkeeping, inventory management, customer service. Within 6 months, you could be earning enough to support yourself." "But my father—" "Your father doesn't own you. No one does." Eliza leaned forward. "I know it's terrifying. I know it feels impossible. But I also know that marrying someone you don't love, someone who will treat you like property, will destroy you slowly, and that's worse than any temporary hardship." Mary looked at her with desperate hope. "You really think I could learn to support myself?" "I know you can. I did it." "So can you." Word spread quickly. Mary Collins had refused to marry William Tucker. She was working at the Mercantile instead, learning business skills, living in a boarding house, and supporting herself. Some people were scandalized. Ruth Morrison called it unseemly independence. William Tucker complained loudly about being humiliated. Mary's father disowned her publicly. But other women noticed. Within a month, 2 more young women had approached Eliza, asking about work, about learning skills, about alternatives to marriages they didn't want. Eliza hired them both. She taught them to read and write contracts, to manage money, to negotiate with suppliers. "You're starting a revolution," Sarah said one evening, watching Eliza work with 3 women on basic accounting. "I'm just teaching people to take care of themselves." "Same thing, out here." By the following spring, Eliza had established what she called the Women's Commercial Education Program, fancy words for teaching frontier women the skills they needed to survive independently. She held classes 3 evenings a week in the back room of the Mercantile, teaching everything from basic literacy to business management. Not everyone approved. "You're encouraging women to abandon their families," a local pastor complained, "to reject marriage and motherhood in favor of unnatural independence." "I'm encouraging women to make informed choices," Eliza countered. "If they choose marriage, wonderful, but they should choose it because they want to, not because they have no other option." "That's not how society works. Then maybe society needs to change." The argument played out in town meetings, in newspapers, in conversations across dinner tables throughout Redemption and the surrounding territories. Some people thought Eliza was destroying traditional values. Others thought she was offering essential opportunities. The debate came to a head when William Tucker, drunk and angry, showed up at the Mercantile demanding to speak with Mary Collins. "She's working," Eliza said calmly. "You'll have to come back." "I want what I paid for." Tucker slammed his hand on the counter. "Her father took my money. I own her. She belongs to me." "She doesn't belong to anyone."
"Get her out here now, or I'll—" "You'll what?" Eliza's voice was ice. "Threaten me? Threaten her? Try to force a woman into a marriage she doesn't want?" Tucker's face went red. "You don't understand how things work out here. I understand perfectly. You're a bully who thinks money gives you ownership over another human being, and I'm telling you right now, that's not happening. Not in my store, not in this town, not while I'm breathing. You can't stop me. Actually, she can." Tom Garrison stepped into the store along with several other men. They formed a loose barrier between Tucker and the counter. "We've all heard the stories about you, Tucker," Tom said quietly. "How your first wife died under suspicious circumstances. How your second wife ran away and was never seen again. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave this store, leave Mary Collins alone, and if we ever hear about you harassing women again, you'll answer to all of us."
Tucker looked around at the hostile faces and seemed to deflate. He left without another word. Mary emerged from the back room, her face white. "Thank you, all of you." "You shouldn't have to thank us for basic human decency," Eliza said. "But you're welcome anyway." That incident became legendary in Redemption. The story spread, how Eliza Hawthorne had stood up to William Tucker, how the town had backed her, how they'd collectively decided that forcing women into unwanted marriages wasn't acceptable anymore. It changed something fundamental about the community. More women started coming to Eliza's classes. More families started viewing education for daughters as practical rather than frivolous. More young women started believing they had choices beyond marriage or destitution. And Eliza, who'd once been the suspicious outsider, became someone the community looked to for leadership. In the summer of 1878, the territorial governor visited Redemption as part of a tour of frontier settlements. His name was Harrison Webb, and he was known for progressive policies around education and women's rights. He asked to meet with Eliza specifically. They sat in the parlor of her home, drinking tea while Webb asked about her education program. "What you're doing here is remarkable," he said. "Teaching women practical business skills, giving them alternatives to economic dependency. I'd like to help expand this." "Expand it how?" "Funding, official recognition, support from the territorial government to establish similar programs in other settlements." Webb leaned forward. "Mrs. Hawthorne, you're proving that women can be economically independent on the frontier. That's revolutionary, and it's exactly the kind of progress the territory needs if we're going to build a sustainable future." What would this expansion look like? We'd establish a network of commercial education centers across Colorado, hire qualified instructors, women who've succeeded in business, who can teach others, provide funding for materials, space, curriculum development. He paused. "And I'd like you to oversee it all, to serve as the director of what we'd call the Colorado Women's Economic Independence Initiative." Eliza stared at him, trying to process what he was offering. A year ago, she'd been fighting for her own survival. Now she was being asked to create a territory-wide program that could change hundreds, maybe thousands of lives. "I need to think about it," she said. "Of course, but think quickly. I need an answer before I leave Redemption." That night, Eliza sat with Caleb on their porch, watching the sun set over the prairie. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I don't know. Part of me wants to say yes immediately, to take this opportunity and run with it. But another part wonders if I'm qualified, if I'm the right person." "Eliza, you rebuilt yourself from nothing. You survived Theodore's attacks, built a successful business, changed how this entire town thinks about women's independence. If you're not qualified, no one is. But it would mean travel, lots of it. Being away from home, from you, from the life we've built here. So, we'll manage. I'm not going anywhere." Caleb took her hand. "You spent too many years making yourself small to fit into someone else's vision of who you should be. Don't do that again. If you want this, take it." Eliza looked out at the land that had seemed so harsh and unforgiving 3 years ago.
Now it felt like possibility made solid. I want it, she said quietly. I want to help other women the way people helped me. I want to build something that lasts.
Then tell Webb yes.
She did.
The next morning, she accepted the position as director of the Colorado Women's Economic Independence Initiative. The backlash was immediate. Conservative newspapers called her a radical, accused her of trying to destroy traditional family structures. Preachers denounced her from pulpits. Men who felt threatened by the idea of economically independent women wrote angry letters to the territorial government demanding her removal. But for every person who opposed her, 2 more supported her. Women wrote letters thanking her for giving them hope. Families wrote about daughters who'd learned to support themselves instead of entering desperate marriages. Business owners wrote about the value of having educated, skilled workers regardless of gender. The program launched in the fall of 1878 with centers in 5 Colorado settlements. By 1880, there were 12 centers serving over 300 women. By 1882, the program had expanded into Wyoming and Montana territories. Eliza traveled constantly, visiting centers, training instructors, securing funding, speaking to anyone who would listen about why economic independence mattered. She became known throughout the Western territories, not as the society woman who'd fled New York, but as the woman who'd built an empire of education and opportunity. And slowly, inevitably, her story reached back east. In the spring of 1883, a reporter from the New York Tribune tracked her down in Redemption. His name was James Mitchell, and he wanted to write a feature story about her transformation. The woman who vanished from the Vandermeer Ball, he said, Manhattan's biggest scandal of 1876, and no one really knew what happened to you. Until now. Eliza studied him carefully. What do you want to know? Everything. Why you left, what you've built here, how you went from society wife-to-be to frontier businesswoman and education reformer. Why does it matter? Because people need to know it's possible, to walk away from a life that's destroying you and build something better. Mitchell pulled out a notebook. Your story could change lives, Mrs. Hawthorne. Will you tell it? She thought about all the women she'd taught, all the lives that had changed because she'd been willing to share what she'd learned. Thought about Mary Collins, now managing her own general store in a settlement 40 miles north. Thought about the hundreds of others who'd found their own versions of freedom. Yes, she said, I'll tell it. The interview took 3 days. Mitchell was thorough, asking about Theodore, about her family, about the early days in Redemption when she'd barely known how to survive. He asked about the legal battles, the town's resistance, the moment she'd decided to fight back instead of running. And he asked about what came after. The education program, the expansion, the vision she had for a future where women didn't have to choose between marriage and destitution. The article appeared in June, spread across the Tribune's front page with the headline, From Manhattan Ballrooms to Colorado Frontier, the remarkable transformation of Eliza Hawthorne. It was honest, unflinching, and it told her story without apology. Mitchell wrote about her mistakes, her struggles, her fears, but he also wrote about her courage, her determination, her refusal to accept a future that would have destroyed her. The response was overwhelming. Letters poured in from across the country. Women who'd read her story and saw their own struggles reflected in it. Men who'd never considered that women might want or need economic independence. Families torn between tradition and progress, looking for guidance. And most surprisingly, a letter from Catherine Morrison. Dear Eliza, I read Mr. Mitchell's article with great interest and pride. You've accomplished more in 7 years than most people accomplish in a lifetime. I'm writing to inform you that Theodore Ashford died in prison last month. The official cause was pneumonia, but I suspect it was despair. He never recovered from losing everything he'd built on lies and manipulation. I thought you should know. Not because it should bring you joy, I know you well enough to know it won't, but because it closes that chapter permanently. You're free, Eliza. Completely and irrevocably free. With admiration, Catherine Morrison. Eliza read the letter twice, then set it down carefully. Theodore was dead. The man who'd controlled her life, who'd haunted her nightmares, who'd tried to destroy her even after she'd escaped, gone. She should feel something. Relief, maybe. Or satisfaction that justice had been served. Instead, she felt only a distant sadness for the waste of it all. Theodore could have been so many things if he'd chosen differently. Instead, he'd chosen cruelty and control, and it had destroyed him. Good riddance, Sarah said when Eliza told her. The world's better without him in it. Maybe. But what a terrible way to live and die, having everything and appreciating nothing. That's more grace than he deserves. Probably. But I'm not doing it for him. I'm doing it for me. I don't want to carry hate around anymore. It's exhausting. By 1885, the Colorado Women's Economic Independence Initiative had grown beyond anything Eliza had imagined. 23 centers across 4 territories, serving over 1,000 women annually. The program had expanded to include vocational training in addition to business education, teaching women practical skills like carpentry, metalworking, animal husbandry, and the success stories kept coming. Women who'd learned to support themselves, who'd started businesses, who'd built lives based on their own choices rather than economic desperation. But the work had taken its toll. Eliza was 33 years old and exhausted. The constant travel, the endless battles for funding and recognition, the weight of knowing that hundreds of women depended on the program continuing. It all pressed down on her like a physical burden. "You need to rest," Caleb said one night, watching her review budget reports at midnight. "You're going to break yourself." "I can't rest. There's too much to do." "There's always too much to do. That's the nature of important work. But you're no good to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion." He was right. She knew he was right. But the thought of slowing down, of stepping back, felt like abandonment. What if the program falls apart without me? Then you haven't built it properly. A good organization survives its founder. Caleb pulled the papers away from her gently. Train people to take over your responsibilities. Delegate. Trust that other people can carry this forward. It was the hardest thing Eliza had ever done, letting go. But over the next year, she systematically trained regional directors, established clear procedures and policies, created a governance structure that didn't depend entirely on her presence. She stayed involved, but from a distance, offering guidance rather than control. And slowly, the burden eased. By 1887, Eliza had stepped back to a purely advisory role. She spent most of her time in redemption, managing the mercantile with Margaret, teaching occasional classes, living the quiet frontier life she'd once thought would bore her to death. It didn't bore her. It fulfilled her in ways she'd never expected. One autumn morning, she woke to find Caleb already up, standing at the window and watching the sunrise. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "How different everything is from 7 years ago. How we've changed." Eliza joined him at the window, looking out at Redemption. The town had grown, maybe 200 people now, with proper streets, multiple businesses, even a small school. The harsh frontier settlement had become a real community. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Coming back for me? Bringing me here?" "Never. You?" Eliza thought about the question carefully. "I regret the pain it caused, my family's deaths, the suffering they went through, but I don't regret leaving, and I don't regret choosing this life." "That's honest." "It's the truth." She leaned against him. "I've been thinking about something." "What?" "I want to write a book. About everything that happened, not for fame or recognition, but because I think other women need to hear it, need to know that walking away is possible, that rebuilding is possible, that you can lose everything and still survive." "You should do it." "You think people would want to read it?" "I think people need to read it." She started writing that winter, working by lamplight after the store closed, filling page after page with the story of her transformation. It wasn't easy, reliving the pain of those early days, confronting her own mistakes and fears, being honest about how close she'd come to giving up. But it was necessary. The manuscript took 2 years to complete. She titled it simply, "Choosing Freedom, One Woman's Journey from Manhattan to the Frontier." Finding a publisher proved difficult. Most Eastern publishers thought frontier women's stories wouldn't sell. Some thought her story was too radical, too threatening to traditional values. But one small publishing house in Boston took a chance. They printed 3,000 copies, expecting modest sales to a niche audience. The first printing sold out in 6 weeks. Within a year, Choosing Freedom had sold over 50,000 copies. It became required reading in women's clubs across the country. Schools started using it to teach about westward expansion and social change. Women wrote to Eliza describing how her story had given them courage to make their own difficult choices. And the invitations started pouring in, speaking engagements across the country, requests for interviews, opportunities to share her message with larger and larger audiences. At 37, Eliza found herself on a speaking tour of major eastern cities, telling her story to packed auditoriums. She spoke in Boston, Philadelphia, Washington, and finally, inevitably, New York. Standing backstage at Cooper Union, waiting to address an audience of 2,000 people, Eliza felt her hands shake. She hadn't been in New York since the night she'd fled the Vandermeer Ball 11 years ago. "You ready?" Sarah asked. She'd insisted on coming along for the New York appearance, claiming she wanted to see Eliza show those Manhattan snobs what she'd become. "I don't know. This feels different from the other cities. Because it's where your old life was. Where people remember you as Eliza Whitmore, the society girl who ran away. What if they hate me? What if they think I'm just making excuses for abandoning my family? Then they're idiots, but I don't think that's what's going to happen." Sarah squeezed her hand. "Go out there and tell your truth. That's all you can do." Eliza walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. The audience was mostly women, but she spotted men scattered throughout, some looking skeptical, others genuinely curious. She began the same way she'd begun every speech on the tour, with honesty. 11 years ago, I stood in the Vandermeer mansion wearing an emerald gown and diamonds, engaged to one of New York's wealthiest heirs. Everyone thought I had everything a woman could want, and I was dying inside. The audience went silent. I'm here tonight to tell you about the choice I made that night, and every choice that followed. I won't claim I was heroic. I was terrified. I made mistakes. I hurt people. But I survived. And I want to tell you how, because I believe other women need to know that survival is possible. For the next hour, she told her story. Not the sanitized version, but the real one. The fear, the guilt, the brutal early days in redemption when she'd barely known how to boil water. The legal battles with Theodore, her family's deaths, the crushing weight of choices that couldn't be undone. But also the transformation, the discovery of her own strength, the building of something meaningful from nothing. When she finished, the audience erupted. People stood, applauding, some wiping tears from their faces. During the question period, a young woman stood up. "Mrs. Hawthorne, what would you say to women who want to leave difficult situations but feel they can't because of financial constraints?" I'd say financial constraints are real and serious. I'm not going to pretend they're not. But I'd also say that poverty is survivable and abuse isn't. That struggling to make ends meet is hard, but losing yourself is worse. Eliza paused. And I'd say that there are more resources available than you think. Organizations that help women transition to independence, skills you can learn, communities that will support you if you give them a chance. Another woman stood. "Do you ever regret hurting your family? Your mother died thinking you'd abandoned her." The question hit hard, but Eliza had learned to face it honestly. "Yes, every day. My mother's last thoughts about me were probably anger and disappointment, and I have to live with that. But I also have to live with the knowledge that staying would have destroyed me. And I chose myself. That's not noble or selfless, it's just survival." After the event, dozens of women lined up to speak with her, to thank her, to share their own stories. Eliza listened to each one, offering what advice she could. The last woman in line was older, maybe 60, wearing expensive clothes and carrying herself with the bearing of old New York society. "Mrs. Hawthorne, I don't know if you remember me. I'm Adelaide Vandermeer. The ball where you ended your engagement was held at my estate." Eliza's breath caught. "I remember." I wanted to apologize. We all knew what kind of man Theodore Ashford was. We knew he was cruel and manipulative, but we did nothing. We valued social harmony over your well-being, and I'm sorry for that. Mrs. Vandermeer, please let me finish. What you've built, the education programs, the work you're doing to help women gain independence, it matters. It matters more than any of the social conventions we thought were so important. Adelaide's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I have 3 granddaughters, and I want them to grow up in a world where they have choices, where they don't have to marry men like Theodore Ashford just to survive. You're building that world. Thank you. After she left, Eliza stood alone in the empty auditorium, overwhelmed. She'd come back to New York expecting judgment, condemnation, reminders of everything she'd destroyed. Instead, she'd found acknowledgement, recognition that her choice, as painful and costly as it had been, had mattered. She returned to Redemption in the spring of 1892, exhausted but lighter somehow. The speaking tour had been a success, the book continued to sell, and the education program was thriving under new leadership, but she was ready to be home. Caleb met her at the train station, and the sight of him, solid, real, unchanged, made her eyes sting with tears. "Welcome home," he said, pulling her into an embrace. "I missed you." "I know, I missed you too." He pulled back to look at her. "But I'm proud of you. You went back to the place that nearly destroyed you, and you conquered it." "I don't know about conquered. You showed them who you'd become. That's conquest enough." They walked through Redemption together, and Eliza noticed changes. New buildings, new families, new businesses. The town was thriving. "Mary Collins got married," Caleb said casually. "Really? To who?" "That young teacher who came through last year. Daniel something. They're moving to Denver where he's starting a school. And she wanted to marry him? Apparently couldn't stop talking about how wonderful he was. Made her own choice, based on love instead of necessity. Seems like that was the point of all your work, wasn't it?" "Yeah," Eliza said softly. "That was exactly the point." That evening, sitting on their porch and watching the sun set over the prairie, Eliza felt something settle in her chest. Not peace, exactly. She'd never fully escaped the complicated grief over her family, the guilt over choices that couldn't be undone. But something close. Acceptance, maybe. The understanding that life was messy and painful and beautiful all at once, and the only way through was forward. "Caleb?" "Yeah?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For giving me a choice when I needed one. For standing beside me through all of it. For believing I could become someone worth believing in." He took her hand. "You were always worth believing in. You just needed time to see it yourself." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and stars appeared one by one until the sky was full of light. Eliza thought about the woman she'd been at 24, desperate, trapped, terrified of her own future. Thought about the journey from Manhattan ballrooms to this porch in Redemption, Colorado. Thought about everything she'd lost and everything she'd gained. And she realized something profound. She wouldn't change any of it. Not the pain, not the fear, not the crushing weight of impossible choices. Because all of it, every terrible, beautiful moment, had brought her here. To this place, this life, this version of herself that could look at the world and feel capable instead of powerless. "Any regrets?" Caleb asked, echoing the question he'd asked so many times over the years. Eliza looked up at the stars, at the vast frontier sky that had once terrified her and now felt like home. She thought about Mary Collins choosing love instead of desperation, about the 1,000 women who'd learned to support themselves, about Adelaide Vandermeer's granddaughters growing up with choices her generation never had. She thought about the legacy she'd built, not from wealth or status or the advantages she'd been born with, but from the raw determination to survive and the radical decision to help others do the same. "No," she said finally, and meant it completely. "No regrets." 20 years later, on a crisp October morning in 1912, Eliza Hawthorne stood at the dedication ceremony for the Eliza Hawthorne Center for Women's Education in Denver, a permanent institution funded by the state of Colorado to continue the work she'd started decades ago. She was 56 years old, her dark hair now streaked with silver, her hands marked by years of frontier life. Beside her stood Caleb, still solid and steady after 36 years of marriage. Sarah stood on her other side, grinning at the crowd of dignitaries and supporters. The governor of Colorado, a woman named Helen Caldwell, elected just 2 years prior, stepped to the podium. "We are here today to honor a woman who changed the course of Colorado history, who proved that one person's courage can transform entire communities, who showed us that independence isn't something to fear, but something to celebrate." Eliza listened to the speech, slightly uncomfortable with the praise, but grateful for the recognition of what the work had meant. After the ceremony, young women from the center approached her, asking questions, seeking advice, wanting to know her secret.
There's no secret, she told them. Just the willingness to keep going when everything tells you to quit. Just the decision to believe you deserve better, even when the world disagrees. Just the courage to choose yourself when everyone else wants you to choose them. But how do you know when to fight and when to walk away? One girl asked. Eliza thought about the question carefully. You fight for things that help you grow. You walk away from things that make you smaller, and you learn to tell the difference. That night, back in Redemption, still home after all these years, Eliza sat at her desk and added a final entry to the journal she'd kept since leaving New York. October 15th, 1912. Today they dedicated a building to my name. Strange to be memorialized while still breathing, but I suppose the work has earned it. I've been thinking about legacy, what we leave behind when we're gone. I used to think legacy was about wealth or status or making sure your family name meant something. Now I know better. Legacy is every woman who learned she had choices, every girl who grew up believing she could support herself, every person who looked at their circumstances and decided to change them instead of accepting them. That's what I'm leaving behind. Not money or monuments, but possibility. And that's enough. She closed the journal and looked around her study. Walls lined with books, shelves holding correspondence from women across the country, photographs of the education centers, and the people whose lives had changed because someone had believed they deserved a chance. This was her empire. Not built on the foundations of wealth or privilege she'd been born with, but constructed from nothing. From desperation and determination and the radical belief that one person could make a difference. Caleb appeared in the doorway. You coming to bed? In a minute. She stood, moved to the window, looked out at Redemption sleeping under starlight. I was just thinking. About what? About how strange life is. How the worst moments can lead to the best outcomes. How losing everything can be the same as finding yourself. Philosophical tonight. I'm allowed to be philosophical. I'm old. You're 56. That's not old. It's old enough to have perspective. She turned to face him. Do you know what I realized today? What? That I'm happy. Genuinely, completely happy. And I don't think I've ever been able to say that before. Caleb crossed the room and pulled her into an embrace. Good. You deserve to be happy. We both do. They stood together in the quiet house, and Eliza felt the weight of all those years, the struggle, the pain, the impossible choices, settle into something like gratitude. She'd left Manhattan as Eliza Whitmore, broken and desperate, running from a future that would have destroyed her. She'd built herself into Eliza Hawthorne, educator and reformer, a woman whose name meant something beyond social status. But more than that, she'd become someone who could look at her reflection and recognize herself. Someone who could make choices based on what she wanted rather than what others expected. Someone who'd learned that survival wasn't just about staying alive, but about staying true to yourself even when the cost was devastating. The woman she'd been at 24 wouldn't recognize her now. And that was exactly how it should be, because transformation wasn't about becoming perfect. It was about becoming real. And Eliza Hawthorne, standing in her Colorado home with her husband beside her and her legacy spreading across the frontier, was finally, irrevocably, completely real. Outside, the prairie wind whispered through the grass, carrying the promise of another day, another choice, another chance to keep building something worth leaving behind. And somewhere, in a town called Redemption, a young woman was learning that she had options. That her future didn't have to look like her past. That she could choose freedom over safety, truth over comfort, herself over everyone else's expectations. And that was everything. That was the whole point. That was the legacy that would outlast buildings and monuments and even memory itself. The simple, radical idea that women deserve to choose their own lives. Eliza smiled, turned away from the window, and followed Caleb to bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to make the world slightly better than she'd found it. But tonight, she was content. She had survived, she had thrived, and she had helped others do the same. What more could anyone ask from a life?